It is the Awesemo MLB strategy show, kicking off the 2021 season. I've really kind of snuck up quickly. All of a sudden, it was like we have baseball, and I've been behind the scenes working on a lot of the baseball stuff, and even then, it still seemed to come up pretty quickly. Definitely really excited to talk about baseball this year. But guys, also don't forget, subscribe to our podcast network, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. This is a scientifically proven fact. People who are subscribed to our YouTube channel, their hitters 27% more likely to hit home runs. So you're going to want to get in on that. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We also have a deal we're doing here, MLB opening day. So we have a promo code starting 9. That is the numeral 9. So starting and then numeral 9. For only $9, you get 9 days of Awesemo Plus for MLB. This gives you access to everything we have to offer for Mlb Dfs, player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, lineup builder, premium Slack channel. That's where you could just hop in, troll me, ask me questions. That's really some of the good stuff there. And I'm usually pretty active answering everybody's questions. So stop guessing, start winning, join Awesemo Plus MLB today. And that is starting 9, the numeral 9. So guys, let's talk about a little bit of MLB DFS before we actually get into the game by game breakdown. Just some maybe overall general strategies for anybody who is new to it. And of course, here I'm joined by my co-host, Alex Awesemo Baker, Mlb Terry McBride. So, Alex, I'm going to start with you. I know everybody always wants to hear from you about everything DFS related, MLB in particular, some of the strategies. So, let's start with this. Explain what is the importance of stacking in MLB DFS?
Yeah, what's up, guys? Excited for opening day here. So, I think in MLB, I mean, there's no timer, so the amount of at bats in the game varies a lot. And if you can get the game with all your guys getting 5 at bats instead of 4, that's like a 25% increase in your expectation. Not to mention that the number of at bats correlates with success at the plate. So really, you're trying to get your guys more opportunities by bunching them all up together.
Yeah, and then also as we talk about MLB, some DFS strategy and tournaments, Terry's writing a really good article for us on the site right now, which is just general breakdown of every day, just general baseball DFS strategies for each in particular slate. So Terry, I know you like to use a lot of the tools we have up on the site. For me personally, I mostly look at the top stacks and top pitchers tool. That is a massive part of my process in building my MLB lineups. What are some of the things that you like to focus on?
Yeah, very much the same thing. I love the top stacks tool. I think it's critically important. Like what Alex was just talking about, we're looking to capture some of those correlated hitters. It's very much an event-based sport. So we're looking for some of those lineups that are just in better situations against weaker pitchers in good ballparks where there's significant probability of upside. And you're looking to capture as many of those single events as you can and get the guys who are correlated with one another within that. So those top stacks are just absolutely critical to what we do here. And then finding the right pitchers to play alongside them, finding a few of the value plays to build into those stacks or some of the ownership pivots within those lineups. So every piece of the puzzle, from the ownership to the top stacks to the top pitchers tool to just the raw projections, is very important to the process. So it all kind of comes together nicely in Fantasy Cruncher for me. And I throw my own home run model into that mix as well. You guys can do that with some of Alex's projected home runs in our in our player props when we have those up. And then I publish my own home run pick for each team through the day that's on the slate. So we've got a lot of content to use for putting your lineups together out there.
And the other thing too is, guys, don't forget weather matters now. There's always a part with baseball where you realize, like, hey, basketball games played indoors. Every once in a while, there's a leaky roof in a basketball rainout game, but in general, weather not something we have to pay attention to for basketball. We do for baseball. We already do have a game that has been postponed due to weather. That is the Red Sox-Orioles game. And then tonight's game between the Mets and the Nationals, that has been postponed due to COVID contact tracing, but not on the main slate anyway. So at least for now, not something we have to worry about. Something else to take note of for this slate, FanDuel and DraftKings locking at different times. FanDuel locking at 1 p.m. Eastern time, DraftKings locking at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So we are going to start talking about the 2 games that are only on the FanDuel slate, not on the DK slate. And then also after we do the strategy show, there's also going to be a live before lock, which is going to focus still on FanDuel and DraftKings, but just not talking about those first 2 games. So we are going to start with those right now. The Yankees, who are one of the bigger favorites on the slate, Garrett Cole pitching for New York, going up against the Blue Jays, a total of 8 runs for this game. So Garrett Cole, who normally on opening day, a guy who we would expect to be projected for a pretty significant amount of ownership, but looking at him on FanDuel right now, not really projected for all that much ownership by us right now. 8% projected ownership, kind of an upstart Blue Jays young lineup. A lot of really high upside prospects, young hitters there. Should be a pretty potent offense. So Alex, starting with you, Garrett Cole, 11,000 on FanDuel, obviously not on the DraftKings slate, but given how little ownership he has relative to what you normally expect, but still a tough matchup against the Blue Jays, how high of a priority is Garrett Cole going to be for you on this slate?
Yeah, today we have a ton of great pitching spots because, I mean, there's two factors working for all the pitchers. The temperature in most of the stadiums is very low, and then the ball is different this year. They intentionally reduced the home run potential of the ball. So I think all the pitchers are going to look pretty good. The one thing about Cole is he took a step back last year for fantasy. His strikeout rate decreased from nearly 40% to about 33%, which is still fantastic. It's just not like the best on the slate. So the matchup versus Toronto is about neutral. The fact that it's at Yankee Stadium is a little bit of a downgrade because that's a good batter's park. But all in all, I think this is just an average day for Garrett Cole where some of the other pitchers may be in more favorable situations.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. At first, I kind of looked at the ownership. It's like, wow, single-digit ownership for Garrett Cole. But then you consider, the Blue Jays much better offense expected this year than they've been in previous years. This isn't just a favorable matchup he's going up against. And also, in opening day, we have a whole bunch of pitchers to choose from. It's not like previous years where we've had 2 or 3 game slates. So, Terry, for you, any interest in rostering these Blue Jays bats going up against Garrett Cole? For me, Garrett Cole just not a pitcher I'm generally stacking against.
Yeah, it's not somebody I would really look to target. I do think there is some power potential in this lineup. You do have, some decent home run hitters. I'm getting decent home run marks up and down the lineup. And typically when Cole does make mistakes, it tends to be in that excellent ace-type pitcher, left one hanging, and somebody got a hold of it and took it out of the ballpark. He doesn't usually give up those games where he's given up 12 hits and guys are just, manufacturing runs. So when people do get to him, it's typically via the long ball. But that said, he's a dynamite pitcher. To Alex's point, his strikeout rate was down last year, but still excellent at 33%. And he talked a little bit, his strikeouts were up during spring training, and he's a guy who talked a lot about the new ball, and specifically something that we might see a lot of this year. Apparently the laces on the ball are a little bit higher. They're a little bit, they perturb out of the ball a little bit more. So guys are able to put a little bit more spin and do some dynamic things with the pitch. He's one of the pitchers that really talked about that. So I think we might see his fastball spin pick up, his curveball spin pick up, which are the 2 keys to his arsenal. And we might see that strikeout rate come up again this year. So Cole's a pitcher I'm really excited about as both a Yankee fan and just a baseball and a DFS opportunity fan in general. I don't think I'd be throwing too many J stacks at him. If you wanted to work in just a couple around the fringes, though, it might be some low-owned potential for upside.
Yeah, some people in the chat have mentioned that there are some indications about looking at Terry that maybe he's a little more inclined to root for the Yankees than most other people today, as he's decked out.
I try not to be too much of a homer.
Yeah, the pictures on the wall behind him, it's probably one signed by Derek Jeter, one's Reggie Jackson hitting a home run. Terry was actually the kid who caught the Reggie Jackson 3rd home run ball in the playoffs back in the 70s.
Hey, come on, you're dating me a little too hard there. I was born in the last year of the 70s. I missed that one. I would have been appropriate for like the Jeffrey Mayer home run, though. That could have been.
You know what, though? So sticking with you, Terry, talking about the Yankees offense, though, I think this is a pretty good spot to look at them as a contrarian stack on FanDuel. We have them with a 6% chance to be the top overall stack on the slate, just a 3% ownership share. So I look at some of those numbers, and you just look at the massive amount of ownership that's going to the Dodgers, which, by the way, I think is warranted with them playing in Coors Field. But I don't think we should be rostering Coors Field stacks in 100% of our lineup. So when I'm looking at some of the high-end offenses to pivot to on FanDuel, I think the Yankees, given the difference between their projected ownership and their odds of being the top stack, this looks like one of the teams to target. I know we mentioned based on your attire right now, you might be agreeing with what I said. Does that make sense to you?
It definitely does. There's just a ton of power in this lineup, and we're actually getting some guys at pretty good prices, particularly on the it's only on FanDuel. So you're getting Aaron Hicks hitting 3rd in this lineup for 3,300. I think is a pretty good deal. Gleyber Torres, I know he had a down year last season, but you're talking about a kid who hit a ton of home runs the year before that. And I think, based on his overall pedigree coming into his career, he's a kid that we can kind of rely on. He had 38 home runs in 604 plate appearances year before last, only 3 last year in his 160 plate appearances, just down across the board. But he's priced all the way down to 3,100, hitting 5th behind Stanton, behind Hicks, Judge, and LeMahieu up at the top of that order. So building up with the top of the Yankees lineup, I think, is a really good spot. Dominant numbers the last 2 seasons dating back to the start of 2019 against left-handed pitching, 220 ISO, first in the league. They do strike out, 23.4% strikeout rate against lefties. That's not the worst in the league. It ranks 23rd, but it's actually closer to the second-ranked team than it is the bottom of the league. 116 WRC plus against lefties as a team, 5th in baseball over the last 2 years, 94 home runs, 5th in baseball over the last 2 years. I think it's a really good spot for them. And yeah, if they're low owned, it's a team I always like to attack. And they go pretty much up and down. I like Clint Frazier from the bottom of the lineup in a wraparound. And even Jay Bruce could be sneaky. It's a lefty-lefty, not his greatest spot, but he's cheap. And a lot of people don't even realize he's on the Yankees, I think. So you can get sneaky power there.
And then, Alex, how do you feel about that? Yankees as a potential contrarian stack. I know, at least if we compare the ownership to what their actual odds of being the top scoring lineup are on our top stacks tool, which I said I really like a lot, the Yankees do seem to rate out pretty well. So are the Yankees a team that you like as a potential pivot off of the Dodgers?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think Terry nailed it. This team has tons of power. Like, even their 9-hitter is way above average. So I have them about 50% more extra bases than your average team, which is massive. It is a little bit of a tough matchup versus Ryu. And I imagine the weather at 42 degrees isn't really working in their favor either. So there are some negative factors here, but I do think that they have crazy talent that makes them a good contrarian stack.
All right, so moving on to the next game. Also, this one only on the FanDuel slate, and then we get into the other games, which are going to be covered on both the FanDuel and DraftKings slates. To me, pretty important game to look at for pitching because we have the Cleveland Indians going up against the Detroit Tigers. Shane Bieber, who was basically untouchable for all of the shortened season last year, going up against the Tigers, who were towards the bottom of the league overall in WRC+. They were miserable against right-handed pitching last year. They didn't hit against righties. They also struck out a lot. I don't see a whole lot of reason to think that that's going to be any different. So for me, if I'm paying up for one pitcher on the FanDuel slate, it's going to be Shane Bieber. For me, he is the highest priority pay up option. Do you agree with that, Alex?
Yeah, I think he's one of my favorites today for sure. I think the match versus the Tigers is very favorable. The weather in Detroit is also in Bieber's favor, and then the Tigers lineup just doesn't have very much talent. Like, their cleanup hitters, Miguel Cabrera, who last year didn't even really hit many homers. So it seems like about as good a spot as you're going to get for Bieber.
Yeah, and then the other thing I'm going to add here, and I'm going to assume that you guys are both going to agree with me, Tigers probably the weakest team to stack on the slate, argue facing the best pitcher on the slate, and then also topped it off with guys who weren't very good hitters last year. So, Terry, how high of a priority is Shane Bieber rostering for you? And safe to assume you're not going to be stacking up the Tigers at all.
Yeah, I don't think we need to worry about the Tiger side of things. People like to get to him here and there, particularly, a couple of years ago against lefties. Shane Bieber is not a weak lefty. He is an incredibly good righty. So I think 77 innings last year, 41.1% strikeout rate. There's your leader in strikeout rate. 2.04 xFIP, 0.87 whip. It just excellent. 33.8% called and swinging strike rate, which is up over year over year. Used his curveball a little bit more and just changed up his arsenal. Just absolutely killer pitcher. 98th percentile strikeout rate, 98th percentile whiff rate on the year. Dynamite spot. And the Tigers versus right-handed pitching back to the start of 2019. League worst 145 ISO, 24.6% strikeout rate is 27th, 28th WRC plus 16% below average, and 25th in home runs against righties, 153 of them. So terrible lineup going up against an absolute killer of a pitcher. Give me all the Bieber we can afford.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the game, Matt Boyd, one of the more difficult pitchers for me to figure out in the league. I was pretty bullish on him heading into last year. Left-handed pitcher who appeared to have a lot of strikeout upside, also somebody who appeared to be improving, and I thought was primed to be a breakout candidate last year. Just ended up being a broken candidate last year, I guess, because he still had the strikeouts at times, but did he get hit so hard last year. He had a bunch of starts too where he just got absolutely demolished. So this is an outing that's really hard for me to really nail down, because I could see Matt Boyd being the pitcher he was of 2 years ago, where he's able to, have a pretty good outing against the Indians. But at the same time, too, if he's the guy who showed up last year, the Indians could be one of the teams that have the most upside on the slate in terms of just offense and power upside, because Boyd really struggled last year. So, Alex, what do you make of this matchup of Boyd versus the Indians? And how much weight are you giving to Boyd's season from last year versus what he did 2 years ago?
I think we got to look at last year as probably the key data point. So he did have kind of a rough year. I remember he was pretty good to actually target. But his strikeout numbers weren't horrible. They were 22%, down from 30% the previous year. The thing is, with a sample of 271 batters, that number should be pretty relevant at 22%. So, I mean, there's a chance he upped his game, but I'm not going to count on it. The Indians lineup is a little bit tougher than average. So all of this is making me lean away from Matt Boyd.
All right. And then, Terry, are there any particular Cleveland hitters that you're looking at as good one-offs on this slate?
So, yeah, I like my home run call for the day, actually, was Franmil Reyes. I think he's in a great spot, one of the leaders on my home run board. So if you're looking for a fairly inexpensive one-off in the outfield, $3,100 Franmil Reyes, I really like his power upside. Just an absolute masher when he gets a hold of the ball. 2019, 548 plate appearances. He hit 37 home runs. Last year, only hit 9, but it was only 241 in that wonky 60-game season that we had. I like the top of the order in general. Jose Ramirez, Eddie Rosario in there. Cesar Hernandez is a get on base and score some runs kind of an option. I think Josh Naylor is a little bit underrated for some power potential. And these guys don't strike out a ton. Projected strikeouts from Steamer, the 2 through 4 hitters all in the teens, as well as Naylor in the teens. Franmil is approaching 30% projected strikeout rate, so you're getting kind of a hit or miss kind of a guy there. But yeah, I like some bats in the Indians lineup. And then just to round off the point on Boyd, I did a little bit of a dive into some of his numbers over the year, and it really seems like the strikeouts in 2019 were a bit of an outlier year. If you look back over his minor league career, he's always been more around that 22 to 24% strikeout guy. The stuff is decent and somewhat dynamic, but I just don't think he's going to push back to that 30% kind of a range. He used his curveball more last year. I'm sorry, that's Shane Bieber that I'm looking at there. He reduced his fastball spin, and that changed his repertoire completely. It made his slider a lot less effective, made his curveball actually a little bit better because people weren't expecting it against the slider, but he doesn't throw it that much. So unless he can find that spin again on his fastball, I think his strikeouts are going to be down in the low mid 20 range again.
All right. The next game we have on the slate here, the Milwaukee Brewers taking on the Minnesota Twins. This is, I think, the only true pick'em game of the slate. We've got, minus 110 on both sides in most sports books. Also a fairly low 7.5 run total for this game. So I just kind of look at all those numbers, and this game, it's just kind of seems like a wash to me. I think both the pitchers, if we're looking at them on DraftKings, are like low priority SP2 options. The offenses, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in stacking against Brandon Woodruff or Kenta Maeda. So, Alex, is this a game that you really have any significant interest in, or is it a game that's just going to be like, hey, some interest in Woodruff and Maeda as SP2s and maybe a couple of stacks here and there?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely interested in the pitching here. Woodruff was one of the best pitchers last year. The matchup versus Minnesota is probably a negative, but the weather in Milwaukee is pretty cold, which compensates for the fact that Miller Park is a batter's park. So I'm looking at the pitchers in this game as a pretty good spot. Last year, Woodruff and Maeda had strikeout percentages above 30%. So those are really solid numbers, and the over-under of 7.5 makes me think this is pretty good for pitching.
Yeah, I definitely think if I'm picking one side, I'm going to side with the pitchers over the hitters on this side. And then, Terry, is there anything to you that really stands out on this game that you're looking to target?
So I agree on the pitchers versus hitters side of things. Really big fan of Kenta Maeda and just what he does when he pitches. 66 innings last year, 32.3% strikeout rate, only 4% walks, 2.63 xFIP, and a 0.75 WHIP. Induced 49% ground balls. Most impressively, 28.5% soft contact induced. Luis Castillo on the other side of this one, excuse me, not on this one. Luis Castillo, it was second in the league at the 28.5. Geez, I screwed that up. Luis Castillo was second in the league, several percentage points below the 28.5% soft contact mark for Maeda. And Maeda was also league leader in hard contact, limiting hard contact. So I really like just, his pitch repertoire and what he does keeping the ball on the ground in the ballpark and just inducing that soft contact. I think it takes the top off of the Brewers lineup here.
Just one other thing I wanted to add, just because I thought it was funny. Travis Shaw priced all the way up to 4,600 on DraftKings. Somebody who, for a lot of last year, remember like FanDuel and DraftKings, there were slates where I just begrudgingly threw him into lineups because he was like min price on FanDuel and DraftKings for a lot of last year. He opens up this season priced all the way up to 4,600. So I thought that was a pretty crazy price outlier. And definitely somebody who brings down my overall interest in Milwaukee stacks just beyond it being a bad matchup. But next game on the slate, this is actually one of the games that is going to be impacted the most by the weather, other than obviously the Red Sox game, which has already been canceled. But the Cubs, pretty massive favorites taking on the Pirates. This is a Wrigley Field game, and the wind is blowing in. So Wrigley Field, the wind is not quite as big of a factor as it was in previous years because they did reconstruct the ballpark a little bit last year just to negate the effects of the wind a little bit, but it's still overall a very big factor. So Alex, you are the resident man wearing the Cubbies gear here. So how much of a factor do you think the wind is going to have here? And does that give you interest in somebody like Kyle Hendricks, who not really a high strikeout pitcher, but he has had success at home before and he has, pretty favorable weather around him?
Yeah. Hendricks is a great pitcher. He's always been a little bit better as far as how good he is at pitching versus his fantasy performance, which he just doesn't get quite the number of strikeouts as some other guys. He's at around 20%. So you're thinking like, okay, that's like 2/3 of the strikeouts of some of the other guys. So that makes me lean away from him a little bit, but I think he's solid. The team total of Pittsburgh is about as low as they get at 3. It's just I don't know if he has quite the strikeout potential as the other guys.
Yeah, one thing that really stands out to me about Kyle Hendricks, at least at his 7,700 DraftKings price, I think he's a little bit different on FanDuel than DraftKings. FanDuel, I wouldn't consider him, but DK as an SP2, particularly for cash games, I think he's really safe at least. So I think that for cash games, he's a little more favorable than for GPPs, just given how low the total is for the Pirates in the spot, the favorable wind conditions. So I think he's probably safer than he has a massive ceiling. So Terry, what are you doing with Kyle Hendricks here? And what do you make of a guy like this who appears to be really safe, but probably doesn't have the most strikeout upside?
Yeah, it's a bad strikeout spot as well. Pirates over the last 2 years against right-handed pitching, fourth in the league, 21.4% strikeout rate. So they don't strike out a ton in the split either. So just not really a K spot, but definitely I think, like you were saying, at 7,700 on DK as an SP2, there's definitely safety in that because the rest of the Pirates numbers kind of suck. 148 ISO is 29th in the league going back 2 years. 89 WRC plus is 11% below average, 27th in the league, and dead last in the league with 91 home runs over the last 2 years against righties. So not a ton of power here to really worry about. I do think over the course of the season, there are a couple hitters in the Pirates lineup that I like a little bit better than the general public. I think there's upside in Brian Reynolds, Colin Moran, Brian Hayes, of course. But I don't think this is the spot. Bad weather game, bad wind situation. Just not the spot for the Pirates offense. I think you're more likely to play the safety of Kyle Hendricks there.
And then on the other side of the game with the Cubs here, I think it's really hard to know what to expect from the Cubs. They made some really odd moves in the offseason, right? It looks like a team that's not really going all in on winning right now. They were definitely looking to cut costs, which is kind of a trend we've seen with a bunch of teams now going into the season. And we've kind of set up a weird landscape for baseball where there's like 4 or 5 teams that are spending super heavy, and then everybody else in the league just kind of looks like sellers right now. And the Cubs definitely looking to be more like one of the teams that are on the selling and the buying end. But still, this is a situation where if the weather was better, I think I'd be looking at the offense at really low ownership. But given how poor the weather is, do you see much upside, Terry, in stacking the Cubs?
I like the matchup. I don't think much of Chad Kuhl as a pitcher. So I think they can definitely get there against righties. 202 ISO, 8th in the league, 22.9% strikeout rate, 15th, 109 WRC plus is 7th, 236 home runs over the last 2 years is 4th. So there's certainly power upside there. We saw them ship out Kyle Schwarber, but they brought in basically the same guy in Jock Peterson. So you've got a solid lefty masher bat in there that's going to be an all or nothing kind of a play. decent home run mark for him on my home run model. Only cost 2,700 on the FanDuel slate and 3,400 on the DK slate. So whether you're looking at Jock Peterson as a one-off or as part of a Cubs stack with the top end of that lineup, I really like Ian Happ leading off. I think Wilson Contreras is a very good catcher option. And then Rizzo and Chris Bryant are pretty obvious, as is Javi Baez. So there are bats to like. Weather-wise and everything else, it's not my favorite of all spots here, but I think it's a good matchup, and I do think you can get to them, and the prices aren't exactly up. You're talking about a pretty discounted price on Ian Happ, Wilson Contreras, and Jock Peterson. Makes everything work pretty well.
All right, and then Alex, I'm going to ask you, Chad Kuhl, only 5,200 on DraftKings. I think we do need a lot of salary savings to be able to pay up for some of the bats, particularly in Coors Field on this slate. So considering all the weather here and Chad Kuhl, I mean, if you look at some of the numbers we have on the site, 27% chance for Chad Kuhl at 5,200 to be one of the top 2 value pitchers on DraftKings, considering some of the weather. And even though you are wearing a Cubs jersey right now, is there any reason you might be considering Chad Kuhl as a value option for this particular slate on DraftKings?
Yeah, I think Chad Kuhl is intriguing at 5,200 just because of the price tag. I do think that on a points per dollar basis, he's probably one of the best pitchers today. And what I'm looking at here is the team total of the Cubs at around 4. They also strike out with their current line of about 10% more than your average team. And then Chad Kuhl, he gets about average strikeouts to begin with at 22%. So I'm thinking like average, that correlates to maybe like 7 to 8K normally. But he's 5,200, so it's not a day where I'm going to go crazy with like really expensive bats, I think. But if I do, then Chad Kuhl is definitely in the mix.
All right. And shout out to Plan B Smoothies. He left us a super chat. He said, good luck this season to everybody. And Plan B Smoothies, good luck to you too. Thanks for the super chat. We definitely appreciate it. And guys, if you haven't done it already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like I was saying at the top of the show, it's just a science fact. If you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, your hitters perform better. And not only your hitters, your pitchers too. All pitchers, if you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, 33% increase in strikeout rate. It's just good science. That's what it is. So make sure to subscribe to the Awesemo channel if you haven't already. And we have so much content coming up, guys. This is like a 24-hour running news network almost at this point in time. We've got shows running from Josh's morning process show starting at like before the sun comes up. He's doing like 4:30 in the morning or something ridiculous now. And you can rewatch that also. And then we've got live before locks going on all day, baseball, basketball, MMA, NHL content. So be sure to subscribe and get all of that information. Hit the notification bell so you know as soon as it comes out. Next game on the slate, another one that's fairly tight here in the Vegas line. The Philadelphia Phillies, a slight favorite going up against the Atlanta Braves. A game that also run total of 7 with Aaron Nola going up against Max Fried. So Max Fried did have a little bit of a breakout year last year, definitely pitched above my expectations, but starts the year priced fairly cheaply on DraftKings, and then Aaron Nola, one of the more expensive pitchers on the site. So what do you make of the pitching matchup here, Alex?
Yeah, I think you got 2 pitchers that are in play today. Fried, he, as you were saying, he had a pretty good year last year with striking out about a quarter of batters. That being said, the matchup versus Philadelphia is about average. So there's nothing making me run to Max Fried today, but I think he's solid. And then Aaron Nola, another guy that has a long track record of being really good. Last year, he had a strikeout rate of almost 1/3 of batters, so that's really solid. It's just a matchup versus Atlanta. They have a pretty solid lineup today, so although Nola looks like a pretty good option, he's not really jumping out as the top one for me.
All right. And then, Terry, I'm going to ask you, this is a game that overall I'm going to find it really hard to prioritize the offenses, but at the same time, too, it's hard for me to get to Nola just because he's so expensive. And I think there's going to be some other high-priced pitchers that I'm going to prioritize. And then that also combined with, we have a Coors game where there's a lot of pay-up options. So Aaron Nola, to me, might be a little bit too expensive for me to get to at a really high clip. Do you feel any differently from that? And are you willing to roster any of the hitters going up against Max Fried or Aaron Nola?
Hitter-wise, I like the Braves side of things better, which means I'm going to like the Max Fried side of the pitching matchup better. Fried, like you guys said, Fried had an excellent year last season, real breakout, allowed only 2 home runs the entire season, 56 innings pitched. It's not a huge sample, of course, but it's definitely a lot less than everybody else allowed, and those came in like the last 2 games of the year, too. He was cruising for a while. Philly's good against lefties, though, over the last 2 years, so kind of a wash matchup for him. What interests me a little bit is the Braves' capability against righties. They smoked righties last season, and then even including the year before, 10th in ISO at 200, 22.3% strikeout rate, also 10th, 108 WRC plus, well above average, 226 home runs against right-handed pitchers, sixth in the league. A lot of talent in that Braves lineup, a lot of guys who get to same-handed pitching. So I don't mind getting to some of them. I think they lose a little bit by taking Duvall out of that in terms of the righty-righty capability. But all those numbers I just read off were for the active roster. So there's plenty of same-handed talent in this lineup. So a little bit of Braves, I think, and I think they're slightly underpriced as you get down toward the Travis d'Arnaud's, Dansby Swanson's, at least on the FanDuel side of things.
All right, and then the next game we have here, it is the Cincinnati Reds taking on the St. Louis Cardinals. A game that I think is pretty important to talk about just because of some of the ownership here. So Luis Castillo on DraftKings projected for right around 30% ownership. He's one of two very chalk pitchers on the slate. Luis Castillo right now projecting to be one of the really popular options. The other one projecting to be Tyler Glass now. So starting with Luis Castillo in this matchup, Alex, I'll ask you on DraftKings, considering what his ownership is, do you believe it's warranted on this slate?
With pitchers, I don't worry quite as much about ownership because like the results are pretty normally distributed. So like right now I have Luis Castillo projected for about 22 on a 9.2K salary. That's pretty good. So if half the time he's getting more than 22 points on DraftKings, that's something I'd be happy with on a normal slate. But on today's slate, I feel like he's in a great spot where he's going up against St. Louis, a team that they're getting, I guess they're okay, but their lineup isn't the strongest. And the thing I'm seeing is that just other guys look like better values or have higher projections. So even though I think Luis Castillo's in a great spot, maybe that ownership makes me think that I can find a little bit better play elsewhere.
Yeah, and then I think they kind of have to be grouped together, and we'll talk about him in a second. But for me, when I'm looking at some of the DraftKings lineups I'm building, a lot of times I'm making the decision, who would I rather roster, Luis Castillo or Tyler Glass now? For me, I lean towards Glass now with just ridiculous strikeout upside, and then also what should be a pretty favorable matchup against the Marlins, and he's also $400 cheaper. So I lean towards Glass now, and then we'll talk about him a little bit more in a second. But Terry, what do you make of Luis Castillo, who is also projecting to be a pretty popular play on FanDuel as well as DraftKings?
Yeah, coming up as one of my higher owned pitchers in this crunch that I'm running in the background right now for FanDuel. So him and Glass now are the top two owned pitchers in that. So I expect to have a pretty fair amount of them. I do like the matchup. Cards improved the top end of their lineup by adding Nolan Arenado this season. But after you get past like, Paul DeJong at hitting cleanup, and maybe if you want to count Tyler O'Neill hitting fifth, ton of power in his bat, but there's also plenty of strikeouts available there. So after him in this lineup, there's just not a lot to love. I like the first 3-4 hitters, but then I think they just completely fall off the map. So I think Castillo's not going to have much problem carving this lineup up, particularly when he gets past Goldschmidt and Arenado there. 12 starts last year, 30.5% strikeout rate, 8.2% walks, 282 xFIP, 29.4 combined called and swinging strike rate with a 15.4 swinging strike rate, which is excellent. So really like the Castillo play. I like Flaherty on the other side of this one as well, although I have a little bit more respect for that Reds lineup.
Yeah, so talk to me about Flaherty for a second, because what I think one thing that's pretty interesting about him is with him picking up about half the ownership of Luis Castillo, leverage doesn't work quite the same way with baseball as it does in other sports. But maybe this is a game where we expect at least it's going to be really close according to what the betting line is for this game. I mean, it's minus 120 on one side and even on the other side. So, I mean, at least there is a little amount of leverage if you're to roster Jack Flaherty as opposed to Luis Castillo, just in the event that if the Cardinals end up winning this game outright, that's a potential 4-point win bonus on DraftKings you could get from Flaherty. You wouldn't get from Luis Castillo. So I think that from that perspective, also with Flaherty also being a high upside pitcher, about half the ownership or so of Luis Castillo, I definitely see him as a viable GPP play for cash games. Definitely guys I'd rather go to than Flaherty. Flaherty was really good a couple of years ago, but was not quite as consistent last year. So, Alex, what do you make of Jack Flaherty and his matchup against the Reds today?
Yeah, I think Flaherty is a pretty solid pitcher on today's slate. He may go a little bit. I mean, it's opening day, so everyone's rolling out their best pitchers. So I think he might not be one of the top guys in that group. And then you have the lineup for the Reds, kind of similar to the Cardinals, except their first five is pretty strong. It drops off pretty significantly after that, though. So I think it's a pretty decent matchup. So I think Flaherty is certainly in the mix. Cincinnati being only 40 degrees is a benefit as well. But I think his base strikeout number being about 26% isn't nearly as high as some of the other guys on the slate. So that makes me think that Flaherty is like a good option, but not a great one.
All right, and then guys, you might be looking at the screen and go, "Whoa, where are all these numbers coming from? Where are the spreads coming from? Where are the run totals?" Well, if you go check out OddShopper at Awesemo.com, it's just a really good way to compare prices across different sports betting sites, and you can see that you're making sure you're betting the best line, because there might be a team you're interested in and you're looking at them as a minus 125 favorite somewhere, but maybe somewhere else they're minus 120. And sometimes those little pennies on the betting line really matter. So OddShopper is a really good, useful tool just to be able to compare prices and make sure you're getting the best line wherever you're making a betting type purchase. Because, you wouldn't go to the mall and look at two shirts that are exactly the same and be like, hey, I'm just going to pay $18 for this when this one next to it is $15. So look, I got the best deal on this Pokemon shirt I'm wearing right here, and it's because I went and found the best deal. Not at OddShopper, but it's the same concept. So make sure you're getting the best price on any sports bets that you make. So next game on the slate, this is the most important one I think to talk about, because we have a Coors Field game. Coors Field, the bane of the existence of MLB DFS, because at any point in time, Coors Field could feature 20 runs scored. It could also feature 3 runs scored. And then everybody goes, why did I roster Coors Field? All these guys are uber expensive and none of them did anything. So to me, this is one of the most important games on the slate to figure out. And then something else that kind of adds an interesting wrinkle here. The Rockies going up against the Dodgers at Coors Field. Dodgers minus 190 favorites, run total of 11 runs in this game. Clayton Kershaw is on the mound. So that could also kind of mute some of the offense of the Rockies here. So let's start with the Clayton Kershaw side before we talk about this loaded Dodgers offense. Alex, what do you make of this matchup? Clayton Kershaw going up against the Rockies. The Rockies offense isn't going to be nearly as good this year without Nolan Arenado, but still it's Clayton Kershaw. It's Coors Field. Are you interested in one side of the game? Are you interested in both sides of the game, meaning Clayton Kershaw versus the Rockies bats? Because I'm kind of inclined to get to the Rockies bats against Kershaw just because it's Coors Field.
Yeah, I think the Rockies bats would definitely be my choice as well. I mean, it has nothing to do with Kershaw. He's a fantastic pitcher, although the strikeout numbers aren't quite as high as we're used to. He did have a nice year last year, so I think he's one of the better pitchers. Honestly, it's just that the weather conditions in this game are by far the worst, and that's why you see that 11 over under being far and away the highest of the slate. So I think that Kershaw is definitely someone I would avoid today. The Rockies have the third highest team total on the slate, or fourth, so they're up in the higher realms there. Because they have the matchup versus Kershaw, they've been priced down a little bit on DraftKings. On FanDuel, a little bit pricier, but I think the Rockies have some decent upside just because of the weather.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely Coors Field, there's always the upside there. And then, I mean, if you look at some of the numbers, especially on FanDuel and our top stacks tool, I mean, the Rockies are currently not projected for all that much ownership because of the matchup against Kershaw, but somewhat decent odds being the top overall scoring stack on the slate. So only a 4% projected owner share, but we're looking at them with the 4th best odds of being the top stack on the slate. So when I'm trying to look at low owned offenses to target, that's always something I look at in our top stacks tools, which teams have, a decently better chance of being the top stack compared to their ownership. So Rockies, at least on FanDuel, definitely look like a good contrarian option. So Terry, I'm going to ask you, Clayton Kershaw versus the Rockies offense. Do you want to get to Kershaw here? Do you want to get to the Rockies playing in just the great offensive environment of Colorado? Maybe looking elsewhere? What are your feels here?
Yeah, I tend not to roster pitching at Coors Field unless it's like Herman Marquez against a bad team there. I think he's pretty effective pitching at home over the course of his career. Kind of bears that out. Last year he was a 3.98 xFIP at home and a 3.67 on the roads, and he's a decent strikeout pitcher. Other than that, I don't really love to go even to a Clayton Kershaw coming into Coors Field as a road pitcher. The arsenal works fairly well for Kershaw at Coors. 23 career starts. I hate ERA as a stat, but it's the one I've got for this mark. 4.44 ERA, 23.6% strikeout rate. So little bits of a reduction in his strikeouts when he's pitching at Coors. The ERA is inflated. Obviously, that's a bad stat. I just couldn't find his FIP at Coors. But it's not a spot I love to go to. So give me the bats on both sides. Dodgers, obviously, best lineup in baseball. Top to bottom, you can roster everybody at Coors Field, but they're all going to be super popular. I think the Rockies tend to get a little bit disrespected in their own home park a lot of the time. People forget to go to them and like to go to big lineups coming into town. They lost Arenado, like you mentioned. We replace a little bit of that power with CJ Cron, and then they kind of fall off. But they do have some interesting speed and multi-position guys in Garrett Hampson, Chris Owings. Raimel Tapia's got a ton of speed up at the top of the lineup. So there are things to do, and then you still get Trevor Story and Charlie Blackmon in the middle of that lineup. So I don't hate the Rockies here. I'll have some.
And then I want to follow up and ask you a question about the Dodgers there, because I think everybody's going to look at the Dodgers and know that it's an obvious team to target, at least in terms of look at all the high run total and all that. And I think everybody knows it's the team with the most upside, but still, baseball is a sport with a whole bunch of variants. They're projected to have way more ownership than any other team stack in general on DraftKings. So we look at that. And are you more inclined to get over or under weight to the field on Rocky stacks today, Terry? I mean, Dodger stacks, sorry.
So for baseball, for me, usually if a team is trending to be over-owned to like their probability of being one of our top stacks, it's not quite the same as basketball for me, where we can kind of just muscle up on that and leverage past it. Based on the variance, I typically would like to spread out a little bit more in baseball and try and grab some of the other potential outcomes. If you get locked in too much in a baseball slate to the one top team and they tank, you're pretty much dead in the water. Where with all the variance across the entire sport, if you're spreading out and grabbing a lot of different outcomes, I think it makes a lot of sense. I know Alex talked a little bit about trying to grab a big swath of the player field in his game plan show behind the paywall the other day. And I'm right there with that. I try and spread out a decent amount.
So, Alex, I think this is a take a lot of people are going to really want to hear from you. How are you handling Dodger stacks for this slate? And do you think that they're too popular?
Yeah, this one is really interesting because even though the Dodgers have by far the highest ownership on both sites, and to put it in context, 28% of the ownership for batters is going to the Dodgers today on DraftKings, but we have them as a 31% chance of being the top stack. So I'm not avoiding the Dodgers. I think if they showed up in my lineups, I'd be pretty happy about it. But I'm definitely going to view that as one piece in a bigger puzzle where if I'm picking a Dodger stack, particularly if I have 5 Dodgers, I'm going to have to get a lot different with the rest of my plays. So you can't just play the same combos everyone else is going to play. So you can get creative. You can try to stack 2 teams with the Dodgers being one of them, where maybe the salaries don't click that well and you have to find like the right one-offs to pull it off. A lot of players may eliminate those possibilities because they're stacking a little bit too hard. So if you get a little bit creative in ways like that, or just finding unique combinations of players as well, I think you can have pretty nice lineups with the Dodgers.
Yeah, and then something else. I wish we had all the lineups here, because something else, sometimes there'll be a really popular stack, and one of the easier ways to differentiate that stack is you could play a few of the really popular plays, but then sometimes there's a guy who's maybe hitting 8th or 9th in the lineup that doesn't have that much ownership. And one of the easiest ways to differentiate a stack is you just play some of the individual players in that lineup that don't have quite as much ownership. That, or, maybe we get to the slate later and we find out that, Cody Bellinger as an individual hitter is projected for, like 40% ownership. So there are ways that you could roster, and I'm just making up a number, but there are ways you could make Dodgers stacks that maybe don't include the highest projected owned player in that lineup. And at least you've made stacks that are a little bit different from what the rest of the field is doing. But unfortunately, we don't quite yet have the Dodgers lineup. But like I said, Live Before Lock is coming up after this. And hopefully by then they're going to have the Dodgers lineup, and they'll be able to break down some of those individual plays and some guys to consider. So before we do move on, though, Terry, I just want to ask you, are there any individual Dodgers hitters, at least that we are expecting to be in the lineup right now, that do stand out to you as potential one-offs or core plays of a stack?
Yeah, core plays, I think Cody Bellinger definitely makes a ton of sense. You mentioned him. He's priced down a little bit on FanDuel for being Cody Bellinger because of the clunky year that he had last year. 243 plate appearances, 239, 333, 455 slash, hit 12 home runs. Year before that, 660 plate appearances, 305, 406, 629 slash with 47 home runs. Cody Bellinger is very much more that player from 2019 than he is the guy who had the down line last year. So get the Cody Bellinger where you can. You're paying through the nose on DK to do it, but he is priced down for what he should be on FanDuel slightly. And then the top end of that lineup, obviously, Mookie Betts, Corey Seager, excellent options. Justin Turner at a little bit of a cheap price fits in nicely, but I think he's going to get ownership because of that price and hitting third in the lineup. Will Smith, I love as a catcher play. A ton of power in that bat and just an excellent hitter for a catcher. So you can get to him. And then a guy who typically gets disrespected, but looks like he is getting ownership today. A guy that I do like to get to on the Dodgers is AJ Pollock toward the bottom of the lineup. Does a lot. Not very expensive at $3,200 on FanDuel, but definitely drawing a ton of ownership today.
All right, the next game we have here, it is the Kansas City Royals. Surprisingly big favorites, the Royals on opening day, but they are taking on the Rangers, and the Rangers were one of the worst offense in baseball last year, a team that I regrettably stacked a lot at the start of the year. And then as the season went on, I was like, all right, I'm going to stop stacking the Rangers as much because they score 3 runs every single game. But there was just so many days where they rated out as good value plays for me last year because there were so many days where it's like, oh, I got nobody in the lineup is priced over 2,800. I got to stack them. And then they would just score 2 or 3 runs day after day. And that got fatiguing after a while. But Royals about minus 160 favorites in this spot, run total of 8.5 in this game. So the pitching matchup here, Brian Keller going up against Kyle Gibson. So Alex, starting with you, given some of the struggles of the Rangers offense last year, does Brian Keller look like a viable SP2 for you on DraftKings?
Yeah, I think so. Brad Keller, right? He has a low strikeout percentage, sub 20% last year. But the other factors are working in Keller's favor, where the Rangers lineup strikes out about 5% more than average. And then the main thing is just the price of $5,900. That is pretty low for a guy going up against a team that has a 4.2 team total. So I do think Brad Keller is a reasonable punt play, but there are a couple other guys I like a lot better.
Yeah, so something that does at least stand out to me about Brad Keller is, I mean, if we look at our top pitchers tool, Brad Keller does have about a 20% chance of being a top 2 value percentage pitcher on the slate. I do slightly prefer Chad Kuhl if I'm going for just like a contrarian cheaper option. But Keller, at least he is at home. It's a favorable matchup. So there's definitely reason to consider him as a low percentage SP2 on DK for GPP. So Terry, I'm going to ask you this matchup, Keller going up against the Rangers offense. Any interest in the Rangers? Any interest in Keller? Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I'd come down firmly on the Keller side of that one. Not getting great marks for the Rangers in most of the things I care about. They're pretty hefty strikeout lineup, even against a not strong strikeout pitcher. To Alex's point, Keller was make sure I'm on the right guy here. Yep, 16.3% strikeout rate for last season, 4.33 xFIP. What I really like about Keller, he's another ground ball and soft contact specialist. 52.8% ground balls last season, 15.5% hard contact, only 33.5% hard contact, 15.5% soft contact. His combined called and swinging strikes is only 24.8, 8.4% of that swinging. So throws some called strikes, doesn't rack up a ton of strikeouts, but against a free swinging Texas lineup that is 26.5% last 2 seasons strikeout rate against righties, worst in baseball. I think there might be a couple additional strikeouts for him. And then I just think Texas is not going to be able to get on top of the ball on him and drive the ball out of the ballpark. So you're more likely to see a 3 strikeout game than a 3 home run game from Joey Gallo today.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the game, a team that I think makes for a pretty good stack, the Kansas City Royals. We have them with the third best chance to be the top overall stack on DraftKings today. They're picking up some ownership, but still single digits, so nothing really all that crazy. Something else that's kind of nice about the Royals, they're cheap. They have a 13% chance of being the top value stack on the slate. So if you're looking to pay up for pitchers, I think the Royals are one of the more sensible offenses to go that route to build that kind of lineup. And that would definitely put you on a way different lineup construction to people that are paying up for the Dodgers bats. So Alex, as a cheap stack, do you think the Royals make sense? Because I think they might be the best cheap stack of the day.
Yeah, I think there's a a little bit of difference between DraftKings and FanDuel here. I'm looking at our projected ownership for the Royals, and this is one instance where the top stacks tool may tell you a different thing than if you look at all the individual ownerships, because what I'm seeing is Merrifield and Benintendi at the top of the order are projected for quite low ownership because they are more expensive. And then if you're just optimizing by points, you're a lot more likely to fall on the rest of the guys because there's some sub 3K guys. And Salvador Perez being at catcher is a little bit higher a value position. So if I do make a Royal stack, I might try to go to some of the more expensive guys because I feel like most people stacking the Royals are trying to get a good value here.
All right. And then I want to address really quick. We did get a super chat here from Derek Stansel. It's not really going to be relevant to this particular slate, but I think it's a good strategy question to ask you, Alex. He says, what is the best strategy for 2 or 3 game slates? So when you're building lineups for 2 or 3 game MLB slates, and I know that I think it was for League of Legends, or maybe it was Call of Duty, you had a really good write-up where you did some good research on some what the optimal builds were for the shorter slates of that. So I'm wondering, how do you approach baseball slate? Something that kind of has a similar strategy as some of the esports stuff.
Man, that is a great question. I think in baseball, one big difference from other sports is there are so many batters that even in a 2 to 3 game slate, there's still a lot of different ways to combine the players, which it does make it a little more similar to the larger slates in baseball compared to other sports. One difference might be like you could consider stacking a little bit more and playing the leverage plays more, like batters versus popular pitcher or vice versa.
All right. And then, Terry, I don't want to forget about you. Royals potential value stack on DraftKings. I think this is going to be, like I said, this is the cheap team I'm going to be targeting the most to get myself on a little bit different builds than the Coors ones. In terms of a cheap team, how much are you going to prioritize trying to get to the Royals on DraftKings?
Yeah, it's a team that I really like. Suffer a little bit for not having Adalberto Mondesi at the top of the lineup here, but I really like what they do for DFS. I'm not sure it translates to on-field success for this team over the course of the season, but the way they're constructed, they have 3 pretty good on-base and speed guys up at the top of the lineup before they get into the mashers. 3 when Mondesi's in there too with Merrifield and Benintendi. And all of those guys with the speed can also knock the ball out of the ballpark. So they're interesting for DFS purposes from that regard. So I like the idea of getting to like a Merrifield, Benintendi, Carlos Santana, Sal Perez, Jorge Soler stack. Just go right down 1 through 5 on this lineup. You don't get a ton out of the bottom of the lineup. You could build Hunter Dozier in there for a little bit of differentiation. Isbell, not really interesting outside of the 2,100 price on DK. And then Michael Taylor and Nicky Lopez, not really on the board for me. But the top end of this lineup, I like a lot.
Can you say Adalberto Mondesi for me one more time?
Adalberto Mondesi?
Yeah, all of a sudden, Terry just broke out like all the tildes, the accent marks. He really emphasized them. I was like, well, that came out of nowhere. That is some sophistication for a man decked out in Yankee gear.
Goes in and out sometimes. My mom's Cuban. I'm allowed to do it every now and then.
All right, next game here, the San Diego Padres taking on the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'm pretty excited to see the Padres this year, a team that earlier I talked about teams, only a handful of them were really strong buyers in the offseason market. One of them were the Padres, who they really went all in this year to try to challenge the Dodgers. They brought in all kinds of high-end talent on the team to already add into what they have in Manny Machado and in Fernando Tatis Jr. So now, I mean, today we've got Yu Darvish starting for them on opening day. Definitely one of the better pay-up options, in my opinion, on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Darvish going up against what should be a pretty weak Diamondbacks offense this year. So in terms of pay-up options, Alex, where does Darvish rate out for you as a priority? Is he high priority, medium priority, low priority?
It's a medium priority. What I'm seeing here, I mean, San Diego is one of the better pitchers parks normally, but that's because the temperature in San Diego remains relatively constant throughout the spring to summer, whereas the Midwest, for instance, gets way hotter than San Diego. So at this point in the year, it's like one of the better batters parks, and we're seeing that today. So I think Darvish is one of the better pitchers on the slate, above 30% Ks. The matchup isn't particularly favorable as far as the weather or the strikeouts from the Diamondbacks. So I'm seeing him as a good but not great option. And then the one thing with this game that I'm seeing is when I just plug in my projections into Fantasy Cruncher and I make some lineups on FanDuel, I'm just getting like the Padres stack, like way more than any other stack. So I'm thinking that the Padres stack could be a lot overowned on FanDuel today. We'll have to see, but I think they're a good stack, but this ownership's a little scaring me off.
And Terry, what do you feel about that? The Padres, number one, the ownership of their offense, and then you, Darvish. What is the priority for you in terms of them being a pay-up option? I mean, if we look at the Padres, I mean, definitely if we look at them and their ownership on FanDuel you have right now, and we have them projected for just under 20% projected ownership, but only single-digit chance to be a top stack. So with that in mind, I think this is one of the better teams to get away from on FanDuel just based on those numbers. So Terry, what say you?
Yeah, it's funny. They weren't coming up a ton for me when I was running 4.3s, but I just ran a set of 4.4s, and they're coming up quite a bit on FanDuel for me. So it's interesting how that came together. I'm a little bit surprised by that. I guess created some salary flexibility somewhere with the 4.3. But I like the matchup. I like the spot. It would be, if I was avoiding them, it would be about the ownership that's going to them. But I was a Madison Bumgarner believer for a while. I didn't think he was done, but now I think he's done. 9 starts last season, 41 innings, 15.8% strikeout rate, 5.85 xFIP, just was terrible. Bottom 1 percentile in everything we care about in StatCast. Just a dynamite spot for a team that is, over the last 2 years, 196 ISO, 10th in the league against lefties, 22.3% strikeout rate, 15th, 124 WRC plus, 24% better than the average team creating runs against lefties, first in baseball over the last 2 seasons. There's every reason to fire away on the Padres for baseball reasons. For DFS reasons, you got to be concerned about that ownership.
Yeah, I mean that's where I'm at too. I'm as anti Madison Bumgarner as it gets. Just from like I was betting against him almost all his starts for the first half of last year because the books just never caught up to it. He was somebody who had all this name value to him, and if you looked at his velocity numbers, they were so far down last year. He was somebody who really struggled to hit 90 miles per hour on the radar gun, and he was just getting lit up. And you just had to look at some of the signs there and think like velocity's down. He's getting hit hard. There was no reason to think he wasn't going to continue to get hit hard. Just the issue I have here is when you're looking at a team that is nearly comparable ownership to the Dodgers on FanDuel, they're pretty expensive, and then like a third of the odds to be a top stack, the numbers just don't rate them out individually as being worth the ownership they're getting. So that is also where my concern is here. So definitely a team I think to be underweight to on FanDuel. Final game for the main slate today, the Miami Marlins taking on the Tampa Bay Rays, and kind of bearing the lead here at the end, but at least as far as DraftKings goes, Tyler Glasnow is my favorite pitcher on the DraftKings slate. He's somebody just ridiculous strikeout upside, a little inconsistent with his control at times, but the strikeouts were so significant last year that his floor wasn't as low as you might think. If you look through his box score, like he was pretty consistently a guy with a pretty high floor and a really high ceiling just because of those strikeout numbers, which should be a favorable matchup against the Marlins. So Alex, do you feel much differently than me, or are you kind of on the same page that Glasnow is the top overall pitching option on DK?
I agree. Yeah, I think he is the top option. So, I mean, Glasnow's strikeout numbers last year were really good. I mean, second probably to Bieber on the slate. And the one thing I liked about Glasnow last year is he pitched a little bit deeper in games than he had in previous years. So, I think the price tag of 8,800 on DraftKings is just a little bit too low, and he stands out as the best overall, like top projected and value pitcher, taking into account that salary. So the matchup versus Marlins, they have a ton of Ks in their lineup. Particularly, I know a lot of guys probably don't get the pitcher strikeouts. It's possible we have the universal designated hitter before this game starts, but if not, Sandy Alcantara struck out like 70% of the time at the plate. So that's like an extra strikeout for a guy that's already like getting tons of Ks. So I feel like Glasnow is a great play today.
And then one more thing, because we're running out of time here, Alex, I want to just get your take on Sandy Alcantara, because there's something we were talking about before the show started, and more of a DraftKings specific play, but he is my favorite SP2 option. So my favorite SP1 on DraftKings is Tyler Glasnow. My favorite SP2 is Sandy Alcantara, somebody who at 6,500 looked pretty good to me last year. The strikeouts were there. So 6,500 price tag, I think, is a little bit too cheap, and I think that he's a really strong SP2 option. What is your take on that? And I kind of already know what it is.
Definitely. You can probably see it in the projections. I'm pretty high on Alcantara today. His strikeout rate is pretty decent. Nothing to get too excited about, but 23%, about league average. The thing is, Tampa Bay's lineup has a lot of Ks. They have a lot of those power hitters that strike out a ton. And then they also have the pitcher batting, which being a American League team isn't normally the case. So that's the extra bonus for Alcantara. And then you take the park in Miami is a favorable park for pitchers. So I think all the factors are looking pretty good for that price of $6,500.
All right. And then Terry, bring us home. How do you feel about these pitchers on this slate? I said already, I like last night on both FanDuel and DraftKings. He's overall my favorite pitcher on DraftKings, where we don't have Shane Bieber to consider. Sandy Alcantara is my favorite SP2. Do you feel any differently than that?
Yeah, I like Alcantara as an SP2 option on DK. I'm actually getting a little bit of them as a discounted FanDuel option as well, which I wasn't really expecting. But there are definitely some strikeouts available. Just looking at the projected strikeouts from Steamer, you've got a bunch of guys in like the mid-20s. A guy like Zunino spikes all the way up to 37% projected strikeout rate. So you're getting Zunino leading into the pitcher spot. There are free strikeouts at the bottom of that Rays lineup for Alcantara. So makes a lot of sense to me, guys.
All right, that is going to wrap up the first strategy show of the MLB 2021 season, but we're not done here. MLB Live Before Lock is coming up next, as well as a handful of other shows that are going to be going on throughout the day. We've got NBA Live Before Lock, NBA Strategy Show, NBA Tip-Off Show. There's all kinds of content coming up on the channel, so be sure to like the video. Also subscribe. Like I said, your pitchers perform better, your hitters perform better as long as you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. So be sure to do that and stick around for the Live Before Lock that's coming up next.
Dodgers lineup just dropped on time.
Nice. So good.
All right, guys, have a good day.
That was fun.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, are we live? I cannot hear Chris at all, but I presume we're live based upon the lack of music. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the MLB Live Before Lock show. Going to take you through the slate primarily for DraftKings today, where we have MLB opening day, all the games ahead of us, all the lineups now in, and already, much like the NBA that we see every single day, one major injury that is going to change the slate before it even starts. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man you haven't seen at all on this channel within the last hour, or let alone the last day, but he's here for you every single day at Awesemo, our director of customer success, doing a lot of things behind the scenes, as well as giving you guys some of the best MLB content around. He's Terry McBride. How are you doing, Terry?
Doing pretty good, buddy. Been sitting here talking to all these folks, so like you're the one joining us. How you doing? These guys know how I'm doing. They've been watching me for an hour.
Well, I can tell you that I'm feeling a little bit tired because I was up till 2:30 a.m. Obviously, with my childlike enthusiasm, building out my MLB sheets, building out both a new data sheet for myself that retools everything I was looking at over the last couple seasons. Also built my lineup sheet, but that's what MLB is about, especially when a season starts. You got to get your process tuned up, get it going as best you can. And we got a lot of assets here for you guys today, both in terms of the data we have, as well as a special deal for you guys at awesemo.com/join, where if you use the promo code starting9 right now, you can get 9 days of MLB Awesemo plus MLB. It's too early for me on the West Coast. Awesemo plus MLB for 9 days for $9. And that is going to be one of the better deals you will find to kick off the season for you guys, because you're getting the boom busts or the top stacks tool, player projections, ownership projections, all the data, the lineup builder, everything you need to make good lineups for MLB. It's going to be at your fingertips. So go to awesemo.com/join and use that promo code starting9 now. It's going to be going for the next few days, but get it immediately because this is probably the best time for you to do it. So everybody's getting their sea legs with MLB. Make sure to go to awesemo.com/join. Use that promo code starting9 now. And this show also sponsored by Jock Market, which has turned fantasy sports to a stock exchange, and MLB markets are now open. So forget waiting until the end of the game to make money. Jock Market allows you to buy and sell shares of players in real time for real money with guaranteed payouts at the end of the night. So MLB market's going to be opening at 3 p.m. Eastern time and 7 p.m. Eastern time today. And for MLB, only hitters will be included now. So use the pregame IPO to pick up shares of your favorite hitters. You can do it during the game as well. You can buy and sell based on your analysis. If a guy strikes out in his first at bat, but you think he's going to have a good run coming back, I think that's one guy that's going to be probably very undervalued on Jock Market. So make sure you're going over to Jock Market, download the app. It's just search JOCKMKT. Use the promo code Awesemo50 because they will give you a $50 bonus on your first deposit. It is an exclusive offer only for Awesemo people out there. So go get Jock Market now and use the promo code Awesemo50 for a $50 deposit or bonus on your first deposit. Terry, we got one big news item which is throwing me for a loop here. Just to start the show, but Will Smith, the player who earlier in the day, really throughout, I think the entire run of our data, our ownership projections, our player projections, was expected to be the top owned play on DraftKings. Now he is out. We're going to have Austin Barnes starting at catcher. And I guess let's talk about this one fast before we get to more of the higher level stuff that you guys already talked about in the strategy show for stacking and the things that you have to do to build good MLB lineups. But Will Smith being out, Barnes being in, how do you think this changes the slate? Because we did have Will Smith projected for 40%-ish ownership.
Yeah, people are going to have to scramble to find some more catchers because Austin Barnes very much not the same offensive catcher that we get in Will Smith. Just looking at him last year, 104 plate appearances, 1 home run, 244, 353, 314 slash, 0.07 ISO. So absolutely just bereft of power. So he's not a guy that you want to do like a direct swap. If you've got a lot of FanDuel lineups in with Will Smith in them, I've got a few that I have to change while we talk. Fortunately, we've got a few hours to get that done. But that's not a direct swap spot. So you definitely are going to have to go hunting for a new catcher or figure out a good way. Hopefully Smith was in a lot of like the util spot on FanDuel, of course, so you can swap guys in a little bit more easily there where you get some flexibility. So maybe you're looking to build in some of the other Dodgers, a guy like Chris Taylor on the board now hitting 6th with second base and outfield eligibility from a reasonable salary in the middle of that lineup. So you can maybe, look to him. Look to Gavin Lux, some of the lesser owned guys to build in. But it might also just make sense to be a good reason to start looking away from what is one of the super chalky stacks. It's still an extreme upside spot for the Dodgers, but maybe you start looking around now that you need to replace one of their primary offensive cogs at kind of an important position if you're looking at it that way.
So let's talk about the Dodgers a bit more here through the concept of stacking, because Terry just mentioned that, and how losing a guy like Will Smith, it does make the stack a bit less clean, maybe because of the fact you're now not putting a catcher into the stack that's going to look different for you, where I think our pal Josh Engelman has said a lot of times that, for catchers especially, you don't mind getting a crappy catcher as long as it's part of a stack. Will Smith is actually a very good catcher, one of the better hitters in the league at the position at Coors Field as well, so another boost there. And him being out, I guess, could degrade the quality of the stack a little bit. I'm going to update the top stacks tool now to see. And the Dodgers still, it seems alarmingly ahead of every other top stack potentially, but it does make it a little bit harder to think to get them where you want to go, unless you're willing to put in Austin Barnes and I guess, maybe take a much lower ceiling than Will Smith would have had. But Terry, let's talk a little bit about stacking overall. And this is going to be probably a bit of a revisiting of things for people who've played MLB over the last couple of years, but with any new season, there's going to be the changeover. There's going to be a lot of people playing for the first time. And the Dodgers are today, according to the top stacks tool, projected to be the top stack by a very wide margin. This is one of the tools we'll give you guys a preview of during the show, but 30% chance of being the top stack on DK, about 27% aggregate ownership for them. That number could come down a little bit because of the Will Smith being rolled out. But Terry, for a stack like the Dodgers, I guess because it's DraftKings specific, you can stack up a few more guys. But how are you approaching this overall? And if you were building your first lineup, or I don't know, if people are doing a 3 max or a single entry out there, like how are you approaching the concept of stacking for a team like the Dodgers, who has 6.4 implied runs for them today and is playing at Coors, all the things that we know normally add up to being a high upside stack?
Yeah, they're simply the best stack, just purely the most likely team to score a bunch of runs and give us a bunch of fantasy points. So if you're looking at it from purely that perspective, they are the go-to team of the day. There's no arguing with it whatsoever. But we do have some very good lineups in some pretty good spots that we can consider alongside these guys. So once you start getting into that kind of a territory in ownership, it might be a spot where I have a bunch of Dodgers, but I'm technically under the field in my full spread of how much I'm getting to them as full 5-mans. Maybe I start building with some 3-man Dodger stacks with some of the more offbeat guys. Like instead of going Mookie Betts through Max Muncy 1 through 5, maybe I grab like a 2-3 Corey Seager, Justin Turner, and then skip Cody Bellinger and go to Muncy and play it as a 3-man, and then build in another 5-man. So you're grabbing a little bit of value from the Dodgers, a little bit of the more affordable guys from the Dodgers. And you can do the same thing, obviously, the further down the lineup you go, while sacrificing plate appearances to get to Chris Taylor's, Gavin Lux's, and Austin Barnes. Not for me, but for some. So I think just playing that game a little bit with the Dodgers might make some sense here. Just try and approach it a little bit differently. You do want to get to most of the best hitters. I mentioned Cody Bellinger as a spectacular one-off potential. So I do want to build with those guys, but you're looking to build, maybe different stacks than what everybody else is doing, and then try and put them together when you are going to them as those popular 5-mans. Put them next to something that is more offbeat than what the general public is doing. Look for some of those less popular stacks to use as your 3-mans, less popular SP2s, things like that. Anything that you can do to get yourself a little bit different without risking too much of your upside would be a good idea with this Dodger stack today.
So if you're playing the Dodgers today, Terry, and this is again ownership reflecting Will Smith being in or was being expected in, he's not in, so it's going to change things around a bit. But would you prioritize putting in a guy like Max Muncy in at 18%, at Gavin Lux, who's not the best hitter, certainly not the best hitter on the Dodgers, but is competent and is playing at Coors? He's also going to be a bit lower owned than some of the other guys. Is there just some way that you would prioritize on a cruncher level, on an optimizer level, to try to, I guess, get different from the jump? Or is it just something where you're sorting out the lineups afterwards and I'm picking out the ones that, okay, well, this one has, this guy who's going to be a little bit lower owned, or this one has an Austin Barnes, so I'm willing to take it here. Just how are you handling that overall approach?
In a perfect world, given more time in basketball, it's something I talk about a lot. I don't use the thumbs. I don't mess around with projections. I think it's all tied very much to the math, to the rates. In baseball, I don't mind just giving a guy an increase. Just hit those thumbs real quick and boost him that way. Give him more randomness than what I would normally assign him if I want a guy to pop a little bit more just on an ownership play. It's just a very different animal in how fantasy scoring works in baseball, how the sport works in general in terms of being very event based rather than being just rates over time. So yeah, I can definitely start playing that game a lot more in baseball where okay, this guy in the heart of this order, Max Muncy is a great example, much lower ownership, reasonable salary compared at 5,200 on DK compared to 58 for Bellinger and high fives for Seager and Betts. he fits in fairly well there. You're getting a lot of power upside from Muncy. And I think he's more the hitter who was a 251, 374, 515 slash in 2019 than he is the 192, 331, 389 guy from last year. And he still had a ton of power last year when he did manage to make contact. 12 home runs in 248 plate appearances, 197 ISO. So I definitely think we can get to Muncy, and those are guys that I'll start to try and get to that way. Today, the way I was doing it was a lot more just kind of eyeballing it. Ooh, there's that guy. Let me move that lineup over just by virtue of being on the show and starting my crunching late.
So one other question I would ask Terry, and I think this is one that Steve Buzzard has talked about at on some of the game plan shows, introducing, I guess, how to play MLB. And if you are a person who is not a premium member, that is one of our features on here where we have guys like Steve Buzzard, Alex, Sean Zahn back, Terry as well, doing office hour shows every day. Game plan show is what it's called. But if you go to the site, you can check that out. Go to awesemo.com/join. That's included in a lot of the packages on there. But basically, he was talking about how he'll crunch, 5-3 stacks, 5-2 stacks, 5-1 stacks, and then put them all together and sort them out. Is that how you're approaching things, Terry? Are you crunching 5-3s, 5-2s? Are you going down to 4-3s? Like, what is the overall stack approach? And also on Fantasy Cruncher, and I'm, it's super basic again for anybody out there who's played MLB before, but we want to make sure we're kind of establishing the baselines early on in the year. But for this spot, Terry, are you also, going to 4-mans? Are you like, what is the amount of crunches you're doing, and what are the different configurations you're doing? And also, are you just using the stack tool on Fantasy Cruncher?
Yeah, so very much tied to everything that I do runs through that stacking tool on FC. And, it's a spot where they've made some significant improvements and added some bells and whistles to allow a lot of really focused control down to, which lineup spots we're using in our stacks, how many gaps we're going to allow it to leave between, like, do you want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or do you want to let it go, 1, 4, 5, 6, something like that. So that's what the gaps in there mean. So very much drive everything through that. And I do the same thing in terms of the process, like what those guys do. I'll run a set of, on FanDuel, for example, while we were doing the show, I ran a set of 4-4s, a set of 4-3s, and then I ran one that was allowing, that was set for 3-3 that allowed for 2 1-offs. But usually I'll prefer to do like a 3-3-2 if I'm doing that. So I'm still capturing some correlated hitters rather than trying to throw 2 darts. I'd rather throw 1 dart at 2 hitters, if that makes sense. So grab 2 guys from a high-end lineup that I like, but especially when it's a high-end lineup that maybe I'm not getting to quite as much because of price, because of ownership and leverage, for whatever reason. That's a way that I like to maybe grab pieces of highly projected ownership lines. So it's something I like to do, mix and match as much as I can through the different iterations of these of how these stacks come together. But primarily, I'm going to be looking for 4-4s and 4-3s on FanDuel, 5-3s on DK, and looking to get as much tight correlation as I can. I'm a real big believer in stacking.
Yeah, I'm doing 5-3s and 5-2s today, and it does seem like a slate where you're trying to capture that one outlier effort, and it's sort of, as Terry was talking about it, it's different than NBA, where I know people are always asking about, oh, should I do a game stack here? And I think for the most part, that's normally not something that I would advocate a ton. I think on the shorter slates, it does make a little more sense, but still, I think you're kind of forcing things there that you would rather let your projections do the work. For MLB, on just the regular basis, whether you're playing the Pirates or whether you're playing the Dodgers, you're just going to get more benefits by stacking guys up. I know one thing that our pal, the baseball savant Jake Hari, who I'm sure will be back on some streams coming in a bit, he's always talked about how he would take smaller parts of a popular 5-man stack and trying to capture, the 1, the 2 or 3 guys, or even the one-off guy who's going to have the production that maybe drives the entire stack's value. I think that's one way you can try to get different, but I'm with Terry, and obviously Terry is one of the best guys here we have on a strategic level on how to approach these things and crunch out a bunch of lineups that are going to be high quality. But for the most part, yeah, you are doing 5-man stacks and then 3-2, and then sometimes you'll see the 5-1s or 4-3-1s pop up on DraftKings. But I think would you agree, Terry, that you're losing a little bit of EV on DraftKings if you're trying to get too many, guesswork, patchwork, kind of putting a bunch of one-offs in a lineup? I feel like on DraftKings in particular, like over time, that could work out on a 1 slate, and you might see that even win today. I think for the most part, you're probably killing your EV over time if you do that too much.
Yeah, and we hear that in different parts of every season. Stacking's dead. Everybody's doing it, so it's better to play one. It's not. We're looking to capture correlation in baseball. 2 guys get on base, the other guy hits a home run, everybody scores points. That's how the sport works. We're looking to capture those events, and you have to capture as many of those events with as tightly correlated hitters as you can. So you're looking for guys close together in the lineups. And once you start throwing darts around the league, just think about how baseball works. If you do your job right 30% of the time in terms of batting average, which is a terrible stat, but regardless, you're probably going to the Hall of Fame, right? You're that caliber kind of a player. So 30% of the time, 33% of the time, you're Mike Trout, 66% of and you're not doing much, right? So there's a lot of just not negative performance, just a lot of zeros to be accrued through doing that. So the more you're throwing darts around rather than going to good lineups in good positions where everybody can be captured by a rising tide for the lineup, now you're just talking about really trying to bullseye those low probability outcomes. And it's very, very difficult to do.
People in Troy in the chat, so apoplectic that we're talking about the Dodgers. Yeah, it's crazy you could talk about the Dodgers and the concept of stacking for on the first day of MLB when we have probably dozens, at least hundreds of people in the chat right now who maybe haven't played MLB, or if you have played MLB before, there are people just literally a couple seconds ago asking, hey, is it better to use a bunch of different players from different teams? Like, that is one of the worst things you could do. And I guess one way, Terry, and this might be different, is in cash games. And I know we don't talk a ton on cash games here for the most part, other than answering a few questions on most live before lock shows across all the sports, but cash for baseball, just, quick 30-second thoughts on that, because I think that's the one where maybe you don't have to stack quite as much, but if you have a chalky stack, like, you'd still probably play the Dodgers in cash for the most part.
Yeah, Dodgers and Padres today, I don't think you're doing yourself too much damage if you play those guys in cash as stacks or as mini stacks. Maybe you grab 2 or 3 of each guys, of each set of guys, and build them in, and then build in some high value one-offs. But yeah, cash, you can get away with a little bit more for sure playing that dart throw game, because you're going to be riding most likely you're going to be riding alongside the public on a lot of those plays, and you're just looking for the most common upside plays in cash. Not something I really like. MLB cash, probably my least favorite DFS spot, where MLB tournament play is my favorite DFS spot.
So let's talk about some of the other stacks here. And guys, hit that like button. In 8 minutes, I'm going to give you guys some of the top 5 owned plays overall on DraftKings. And I guess, FanDuel doesn't matter. So just on DraftKings. So hit that like button now. We still have money time for MLB, and even more appropriate to wear a backwards hat while doing an MLB show. So we've got that going for us today. Well, let's talk about some of the other stacks. And I think pitching for me is going to be pretty cut and dry. So I'm going to push that off a little bit here. But the stacks, Terry, for the most part, I was going to get Baltimore a decent amount before that game got postponed. Woke up to see that, as well as the Mets. Mets and Nationals, COVID for them. So that's fun that they're still dealing with that at this point in the game. But for this game, or this slate rather, I don't know who I like as a number 2 stack. I know you guys were talking about Kansas City. I think they seem like a decent value spot for them. Texas as well looks pretty value-minded. Arizona, another team that's pretty value-minded. But the ownership for the most part, Terry, in terms of the chances of being a top stack, every team looks over leveraged here for the most part, or at least not, a high probability plus low ownership. And I think that does make it where I really won't mind any team I get, as long as I'm getting some Dodgers exposure, whether it be the mini stack or the large stack. But is there a second team here that jumps out to you as being really meaningfully above the others when accounting for ownership and the sacks?
I think KC is definitely interesting there. They're a team that I don't know that a ton of people, without the benefit of tools like ours and data like ours, I don't know that that's going to be the one that a lot of the public lands on. They're a little bit under the radar for just kind of a lack of stars, especially with Mondesi out of the lineup. So I think they're going to sneak past some people, potentially a little bit under where we've got them rated in ownership. They're coming in owned a little bit more than their probability of being the top stack on DK, but I think it's a negligible amount. And then as you start going down that list, Minnesota, I talked about not really loving their opportunity, particularly with Nelson Cruz not in the lineup. But if you wanted to get to some of the power in that lineup, they stand out a little bit above their potential ownership. And then a spot that I think is very off the radar, because they're going up against a very good right-handed pitcher, is Atlanta. 4.2% probability of being our top 2 stacks, only 1% owned in that stack. So I think you can get to some good bats with Atlanta, and a team that, again, not a lot of people are going to be considering, because Aaron Nola is an excellent pitcher. They just mash right-handed pitching. So I think there could be something sneaky there, but you're taking a chance on that one.
Here's one team that I was intrigued by on an implied run total level, but I don't know why their total's so high given what we know of Wrigley Field. But the Cubs projected for 5.1 implied runs today, and the wind seems to be blowing in pretty heavily at 14 miles per hour. And I guess maybe this total has changed. I pull my totals from Fantasy Cruncher. It does seem like it's down now on some of the other sites I'm looking at, down to 4 runs. But the Cubs for you, I guess this might not be as relevant now if that total has come down, but are they a team in play for you at all going against Chad Kuhl, who I think to me on paper, it looks like the worst pitcher on the slate in terms of just the results he's had over the last couple seasons.
Yeah, I don't have much respect for Chad Kuhl as a pitcher. 46 innings over 9 starts last year, 22.3% strikeout rate around league average, 14.2% walk rate. That is awful. He was very, very bad at that last year. So he just put way too many guys on base, which I think is where some of that run expectation comes from for us. 4.98 xFIP, 1.36 WHIP, just not good. Only 9.8% swinging strikes, doesn't induce a bunch of strikeouts. I think there's definitely upside for that Cubs lineup. It's a lineup that from at least 1 through 6, I like. And I think there's actually, something sneaky in Jason Hayward hitting 7th as well. So you can stack this lineup up and down. The prices aren't overly friendly. 5,000 for Wilson Contreras, probably one of the better catcher plays on the slate now that we don't have Will Smith, but you're not getting them at a real discount. Rizzo and Bryant, I think they're both appropriately priced. Same with Javi Baez. The guy who stands out as a discount is Jock Peterson in this spot. Tremendous home run opportunity for Jock going up against a bad righty, and only 3,400 on the DK slate. So I like Jock a lot here. If you build him in as a one-off, I think you can get away with it. I think he plays pretty well as part of the stack. And then starting things up top with Ian Happ, a hitter that I like a lot, and also a pretty good home run mark.
Yeah, I think Jock was one that jumped out to me, and I agree. This to me did seem more like a one-off and cool. Even with him being not the best, still giving up only a 181 ISO over the last couple of years, so it's not like he's given up crazy power by any stretch. And I think the wind moving around there, I'm not sure where. I guess Fantasy Retro maybe not updating their Vegas totals right now as aggressively with all the other updates they're doing today. Terry, we talked about before the show.
I think that on Odd Shopper though, right?
Yeah, no, well, it's hard to import from OddsShopper. I've been trying, but of course, OddsShopper is where I go for my win percentage, my ROI percentage tools. That's where I'm putting the real money, Terry, but not just building an Excel spreadsheet like I need to do every day, like an OCD maniac. My color coded Excel spreadsheet. I think
I got mine up too.
It's beautiful right now. It's the prettiest it's going to look all year long.
Absolutely. It always starts out looking so nice. And then if yours is anything like mine, I have way too many tabs, way too many references back and forth. And I absolutely want to have a word with the guy from Fangraphs, if you're out there listening, who decided to change the team name column to the team abbreviation column for this year. That destroyed me. And that cost me many hours fixing my my baseball model. So that was a fun surprise.
It's so silly, but yeah, that was the same thing for me, where I had to update my naming structures and all of that too to get a lot of things realigned. And, honestly, was helpful prep, I guess, to just data enter a bunch of different names and get them lined up the right way. But definitely MLB, one of those sports where Fangraphs really, I think for any sport out there, the best data site you have to export things. If you are going to build your own data sheet, you have every possible option, some of the core stats to look at. I guess that's one thing we can hit on real fast before we give out some ownership, Terry, for money time here. And I guess we should do home run picks. That's something we might need to bring back here because maybe we don't need to formally track it, but we got to put our nuts on the line a little here on the first.
I want it formally tracked. It wasn't formally tracked last year, and I trounced everybody. I want it formally tracked this year.
I just don't want to do it. That's the issue, is that when I was doing it with Josh and our other guys, was that like it would always be, oh, cool, Spags has to enter it or it never gets entered.
Well, we've got producers. We've got all these high-end producers behind the scenes now, right, Chris? True. Chris waving at
we might need to dispatch some work because the talent doesn't want to update the run spreadsheet anymore. But let's talk about honestly, I guess the thing we should talk about real fast, and maybe it won't be as fast as I'd like to get, but some of the core stats we look at, and I think you're going to hear them a lot on the shows we talk about. But for me, batting average is one that I know is sort of an old school one, but I think Alex kind of warmed up to over the last couple of years, where that's one that I look at, not one I'm trying to cite too much because it is sort of indicative of a lot of other situations and not the best predictor of everything. But OBP, ISO, BABIP, WRC plus for pitchers. I like the chase rate, the swinging strike rate. Obviously the strikeout rate itself is going to be crucial. But Terry, is there any one stat, I guess, give me one for pitchers and hitters that you find to be the most crucial one to look at if somebody's just trying to understand baseball and maybe getting lost amidst all the various acronyms that are out there, because there are so many baseball stats and not all of them are going to correlate directly to the fantasy performance.
Yeah, so we like to look at some of the stats that are more pulled out of circumstance, right? They take circumstance out of the equation, try and look at the raw data of what this guy actually is in a relative situation where everybody's on the same tier, right? So for pitching, instead of looking at ERA, look at FIP or look at XFIP. I prefer XFIP, expected fielding independent pitching. It takes fielding out of the equation and gives you the pure pitcher performance. And you can put that alongside, more simple stats like strikeout rate that I mentioned a lot, walk rate that I mentioned a lot. Something that I like that Lofty turned me on to last season that I'm incorporating more this year is the swinging strike rate plus the called strike rate. You guys heard me mention that a few times on the last show if you were watching. And I like using that alongside the swinging strike rate because it just tells you how a pitcher's pitching. Is he, working the corners and getting those called strikes? Is he pitching out of the zone and getting a lot of swing and miss strikes? How does his stuff work? So I like looking at that, and you can kind of extrapolate from those numbers. On the offensive side of things, I'm not the biggest believer in batting average, but I do include it, of course, when I rattle off the triple slash. I gave a few of those earlier for people that don't know. That's batting average first, on-base percentage, and then slugging percentage in those triple slash numbers. What that doesn't include, and I always try and look at it, is ISO, which is an isolated power metric, tells you how much a guy's driving the ball, and weighted runs created plus, WRC plus, which I mention a lot. That's a really easy one to use because it works on a 100 scale. So 100 is league average, and then if a guy is at, let's say, Brian Hayes from last season, only 95 plate appearances, but a 195 WRC plus means he was 95% better than league average across those 95 plate appearances in creating runs. Had a terrific little cup of coffee last season. So you can look at that. It's very easy. If they're below 100, they're below average. If they're above average at creating runs. So those are a few that I like to use.
Yeah, I think that's helpful and definitely along the same page here. So you're going to hear those numbers a lot over the course of the season, but just want to give you guys one to look at here and just try not to get lost in all the noise out there because I think with MLB in particular, there is a lot of noise, but it's money time here now, guys, for MLB, the first one of the MLB season. So let's flip the hat give you guys top 5 owned plays. And I guess some of the top stacks tool that we've sort of given you guys there. It's going to be a lot of Dodgers ownership wise, but number 1 on DraftKings, smash the like button, guys, too. We could use you guys helping us out there, get the algorithm going here for these new all the MLB content, lots of shows coming up for MLB, including later today, another MLB Live Before Lock coming up. We are going to be doing a one at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So in the former time slot, and Terry, it's you again. Boy, you cannot get away here. and Gundacker. I know I've heard that name before. He's been around the DFS industry for a while, but Gundacker now, I think, to me, probably the most badass name we have in all of Awesemo.
Yeah, I like that, especially the way you said it. It's sounded like
Gundagger,
like
the hot new action movie, Gundacker. He's good. Honestly, he would kick John Wick's ass. I think that Gundacker. Top 5 owned plays on DraftKings. Number 1, Tommy Pham, coming off of his sordid injury, whatever issues. 40% ownership for him on DK. Number 2, Cody Bellinger, 35%. Number 3, Mookie Betts, 35%. Number 4, Tyler Glasnow, 34%. He seems to me a pitcher that's unavoidable based on Awesemo's projections. And number 5, another Dodger, Corey Seager at 33%. Terry, out of that top 5 here, where you have Tommy Pham, Bellinger, Betts, Glasnow, Seager, which one do you think you get the least of? And I think for me, it's going to be Tommy Pham, just because I'm a little bit down on that San Diego stack ownership.
Yeah, and all those other guys would just get caught up in those Dodgers stacks that are going to be so popular. So it would probably be Pham. I was taking them down a little bit as well, just not trying to get to quite as much of the Padres as everybody else. That said, I would still have a pretty good amount of Tommy Pham, very good speed and power player leading off for that team at the top of that stack in front of Fernando Tatis, Eric Hosmer. I really think it's a good spot for him in particular, but like I wouldn't necessarily be looking at such a popular player to build in as a one-off. I might go instead of him, look at, if you want to grab a Padre as a one-off, maybe a Will Myers, maybe a Jurickson Profar, some of these slightly less extremely popular plays to build in that way.
All right, and let's do the home run pick now. I feel like it's tough. I don't want to pair things with money time necessarily, but I do think that it seems like a good time to do it. And I'm going to let you go first, Terry, since apparently you're a king of all these things, and I don't want to I don't want to disrespect you after your dominant MLB season last year. So give me your pick here for who would be the most likely to hit a home run.
My pick for today is Mr. Franmil Reyes, very powerful right-handed hitter going up against a lefty pitcher that I have no respect for in Matt Boyd.
Okay. I think, man, so just to set the rules a little bit here, Coors Field never allowed. That's just one of those spots that, for the most part, I think we know is going to be a little too fertile. And, man, you said his name so enthusiastically. I feel like I kind of want to just take it. And this is a superstar player who's now, it's messed up because I didn't do a lot of MLB content last year because of the timing of everything and me doing some other stuff. But I want to take Fernando Tatis. Is he too good now to take him? Is that where we are?
I'll allow it. I think you can
Okay.
take him. I think he's the very top of my home run board, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, I got him at a 23.73 in my home run model. So anything over 20 means like you have a spectacular chance of hitting a home run, and he's at a 23.73, highest guy on my board. I had Fran Mill at a 17.31, a couple pegs down. Several of the guys in between the two of them were Red Sox though, and they're off the board now.
Yeah, Tatis to me going against Madison Bumgarner, who's been terrible against righties for the last few years. 222 ISO to that side of the plate, 4.94 xFIP, one of Terry's favorite stats there. So lots of positive things if you are a righty going against Bumgarner. And I guess that also does lend itself to Tommy Pham as well, though not quite as much of a massive power guy as Tatis against lefties, but still Tommy Pham probably deserving of that ownership. I guess that's the question I would have for you. Terry, do you feel like Tommy Pham deserves to be that chalky of a play? He's hitting leadoff at 3,100, and you don't have, I think Cedric Mullins might have picked up a little more ownership if Baltimore were playing just because he was so cheap and hitting leadoff as well. But Pham here, he's definitely the best value play. I think for cash, you would probably want him in for sure. But how are you handling him? I know we talked about it vis-a-vis the ownership, but it is a nice price point against a pitcher in Bumgarner who does very much stink against righties.
Yeah, it's a killer spot. So the only thing we're worrying about with rostering him or any of these Padres, really, at least from the top end of the order, is where they're going to come in with public ownership. So if you're taking that off the table, it's a just phenomenal Padres spot. Bumgarner last season, 41 innings pitched, gave up 13 home runs in those 41 innings. Ouch. 25.1% combined swinging and called strike rate, only 7.5% of that swinging strike. So he's trying to work the corners, and he gets nailed when he doesn't drill them. So 15.8% strikeout rate overall, 5.85 xFIP, 1.44 WHIP. Even if they're not hitting the ball out of the ballpark, there's every reason to think that these Padres are going to get on top of Bumgarner with their ability to get on base, steal base. I like everything about the spot except for the ownership, and some of the prices are a little bit much to pay. But I think you can definitely roster Pham. It's a good call using him in cash games. That makes a ton of sense to me.
Gentry in the YouTube chat saying, been listening to Gun for about 3 years now. Now he's here. Mind blown. Yeah. That's big news for, I guess, anybody out there who's been following him, and definitely a guy's been grinding on his own for a while out there. But yeah, that's what the Awesemo commitment is, trying to get the best talent in here. Best guys have been working their asses off to bring you guys good information. And that's going to be Gundacker coming up later today. I might never do a show with him. I don't know on the schedule right now. It's not happening, but Lord bless him. I'm going to be saying that name so many times and having a good time. Shout out to also a new Awesemo member, Producer Ty. Thanks, Producer Ty, for I think it's funny our employees feel like they have to join Team Awesemo and kick in a few bucks to the company that pays them. And also shout out to Jock Market as well, real fast, because there are going to be a lot of great plays on there today. Again, the IPO market's open, or going to be opening at 3 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Eastern time, or the regular markets are opening. You could get your IPOs in now, only hitters on there. And I think Fernando Tatis would be a very nice play to invest in on Jock Market as one of your core foundations on there. So go over to Jock Market, search it on the App Store, JOCKMKT, use the promo code Awesemo50 for a $50 bonus on your first deposit. And it's going to be very helpful because you can honestly turn that into a lot of winnings right away. And DFS, we talk about a lot. Some of these sites out there that partner with us, they do a great job offering overlay and all those things. For Jock Market, if you are paying attention, you can find little slivers of edge for yourself every single night. So make sure you're playing over at Jock Market as well. Let's talk about the pitchers a little, Terry, because to me, I will say it, I'm playing all Tyler Glasnow and Sandy Alcantara, which doesn't seem the best. You are losing the potential win bonus, but on DK, I just don't mind it because Awesemo has both these guys projected fantastically. I do think if you're going to make a case to move away from one, I think you move away from Sandy Alcantara, who has been fine. He's over the last couple of years under league average as a strikeout guy, only a 19% K rate. But last year, as Alex mentioned on the last show, got up to a 22.7% K rate, which is just under league average. That seems like decent enough going against Tampa Bay, who has 7 guys in their lineup who strike out above league average. But in this spot, Terry, are you with me here on Glasnow and Alcantara? And I guess if you're going to try to move away from one, Glasnow going to be higher owned, Alcantara a little bit less talented. Which one do you want to move away from?
I would probably be moving away from Alcantara. I think that's more replaceable, even though it's an extreme value play. I think you don't necessarily sacrifice too much in terms of, yeah, you're moving maybe from a very high end stack to like a next level down stack. But with the variance in baseball, I don't mind doing that on the offensive side of things and then paying an extra 1,000 to get to a better mid tier pitcher as my SP2. Glass now, I think, is just in the more talented pitcher by far, to your point, and then just facing the easier matchup. A lot of strikeouts on both teams, but just I have a little bit more respect for some of the power bats in that Rays lineup. Marlins filled out with some good veteran talent. You get Adam Duvall in there now, very good righty bat. You've got Starlin Marte and Corey Dickerson up top, of course. But just, I don't love what the Marlins do from top to bottom, and there are plenty of strikeouts for Glass now. And you get down to Jorge Alfaro striking out like 35% of the time. There's just a lot for him to do, coming into that pitcher spot where he picks up a free strikeout essentially with Alcantara in there. I like the Glass now side a lot, and I'm willing to eat the ownership on it.
The other question I would have then, if you are playing a lot of Glasnow, and this is another game theory type question, appreciate everybody in the chat too. We saw one come through from Hugo saying, "Nice work, gentlemen. Appreciate the knowledge drop." Definitely, trying to make sure that everybody gets up to speed here because we have some other guys in chat asking about. Mike asked if the game gets postponed, does it count for tomorrow? No, it is very much a one-day scenario for everything MLB, and that is a big part of the factors here. I know we have the postponement risks put into the ownership projection, or actually the player projections, excuse me, on Awesemo.com, because that is a huge part. Obviously, NBA has gotten to be a bigger part, but for entire games getting canceled or getting rained out or whatever, if you put that money in and you put money on a team that is rained out or COVID strict or whatever, you are just losing that money. So just be very mindful of that.
Yeah, for sure. You always got to be monitoring that. It's a little bit of a reprieve comparatively with NBA with all the crazy changes, but we saw somewhat unexpectedly the Washington Nationals got nailed with some COVID close contacts. The news came out last night. They waited till today to postpone it like an hour before lock, hour and a half before lock. So we're going to have that concern a little bit more than normal. The COVID tracing, especially, not easy to monitor, like the weather is, but at least we can anticipate the weather to some degree.
So the one question that I think everybody always asks in MLB, and I guess is a helpful illustration for the people out there who are new to the sport or trying to get a little sharper with it and how they're approaching it for DFS. But stacking against a highly owned pitcher is one way to get immediate leverage and to get away from the field while also hurting the field if it does work out. And Miami in this game, only 3.5 implied runs going against Tyler Glass now. But Terry, as you mentioned, there are some guys who can hit now. You do have Starling Marte, you do have Adam Duvall, you do have Brian Anderson. All these guys have hit righties fairly well with a good degree of power. All these guys also over a 122 WRC plus, so another nice mark for them. Is there any world in which you're getting to Miami guys, knowing that historically we have seen Miami stacks blow up entire MLB slates many times over the last few years? Are you willing to get to them at all today as either as a 3-man stack or just to get some value in there? Because that is, I think, the most direct way to get leverage on the field other than perhaps not playing Tommy Pham.
Yeah, it does make some sense to attack highly owned pitchers, and baseball's a spot where you're willing to do something like that. Again, just given the nature of the sport, the variance of the sport, he puts a couple guys on, and a guy like Duvall goes deep, and all of a sudden you've got a pretty decent scoring lineup, and then they can accrue some points, throughout the rest of the game. Duvall would probably be my choice for a one-off hitting cleanup today. 13 of his 16 home runs came same-handed righty against righty last season. Only cost 3,400 on the slate, so you're not paying a ton for a lot of these guys. I would probably, I don't know if I would go all the way down the lineup to like Jorge Alfaro or Miguel Rojas. But if you wanted to stop at the 6th spot with Jazz Chisholm, who is named 4 different things across the industry this year.
Jazzarado
Jr. He's all over the place. That was a fun one. So I think you can go down to him, but you're baking in some hefty strikeout rates. You're probably baking in a lot of zeros and strikeouts by doing that, but there is the potential for them to go sideways against Glass now and break the slate as well, like you mentioned. A little bit of just narrative. We've seen the Marlins do that. I think we perceive the Marlins doing that a little bit more than they've actually come through and done it overall in terms of what's won slates at the end of the night. They're out ahead of the field a lot of times, and then kind of by the end of the night those West Coast teams catch up in some slates, but they've definitely done it in the past, so I think it's there on the table. And just again, with the variance in baseball, you can go to less likely teams and and get to some of these further afield plays a lot more so than in a sport like basketball, football.
Let's talk some more pitchers here because there are going to be some other options. And I do think based on Awesemo's projections today, if you are running those, you are going to see a lot of Tyler Glasnow, a lot of Sandy Alcantara. Alex mentioned that in the last show, so don't be surprised by it, but that is a configuration that's definitely going to be there. And even for me, sorting to try to get some lower owned lineups in the mix, I could not get away from Glasnow and Alcantara, though Alcantara's ownership for the rest of the field, not going to be the highest out there compared to Glasnow, who is the chalk pitcher of the day. Other pitchers, Terry, who you find interesting, I just feel like we can hit on real quickly here because, as I mentioned, those are my guys today, but I do think that you can justify going to a Kyle Hendricks, trying to get that win bonus, especially now that we know the wind is blowing in there, going against a Pittsburgh team that, besides the aforementioned Brian Hayes, not really a lot of guys are going to strike fear into these people's hearts. Yu Darvish, very expensive pitcher today. He also seems like he's in a decent spot against Arizona. For him, always been a solid strikeout guy who figured out some of his power issues last season. But Terry, is there anybody else you'd really prioritize besides Glasnow, or are you just kind of getting whatever you get?
To a degree, getting whatever I get, specifically on the first slate of the year. We'll see where these go. It's easier to do when we've got, for the most part, all SP1 type guys to work with. So you can mix and match some of these dudes in. I really like the spot for Yu Darvish that you mentioned as one of the spectacular pay-up options. If you can afford to get to him against this Arizona team, I think he's got a very good chance of putting up a killer game. 12 starts last year, 76 innings, 31.3% strikeout rate, only 4.7% walks, sub-1 whip. Massive cutter usage, which was the big change that he put in over the last year and change to, just really save his career. He was really starting to trail off and came back with just a monster strikeout artist again. Arizona, middle of the pack in terms of ISO, 14th over the last 2 years, 190 ISO against righties. 21.8% strikeout rate is actually pretty good, 6th overall in baseball, but I think he's a good enough strikeout artist that he's going to be able to get it done against this team. And there's not a ton of power to really threaten him here. So I like going to him. A guy who's a little bit off of Alex's board that I think I like a little bit better than Alex does as a cheap SP2 option is Brad Keller against that Texas lineup. We talked about him earlier in the show, or in the last show rather. Not a strikeout guy, but that is the worst strikeout team in the league the last 2 years against right-handed pitching. So there might be a few extra ones in there for him. And he is a guy who is excellent at keeping the ball on the ground, keeping the ball in the ballpark. So he's going to take the bat out of a guy like Joey Gallo's hands, and he's their only good offensive player, their only real home run threat. So I really like him as kind of a sneaky under the radar play who maybe he doesn't rack up a gigantic ceiling game, but as a cheap SP2, I think he slots in for a nice median score there that you can kind of rely on and build some safety in your lineup. So I like Keller in that spot.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And for what it's worth, I got a lot of David Dahl today, so I would be greatly hurt by Brad Keller having a nice day. But I do think I'm with you. Like the power really hasn't been there being given up by Keller at all. The issue for him is just that he could get, just hit over and over again. But going against a Texas team that going back to last year was really bad versus right-hand pitching. They only had a 288 on base percentage versus righties last year, which is not particularly good. This lineup today should be a bit better, but still strikes out at a 25% cumulative rate. Definitely some ways for Keller just to pick up a few strikeouts. And for a guy like him, you're mostly just hoping that he avoids major damage, avoids giving up any home runs. And honestly, today, playing at Kansas City's park going to help him out a good amount as well, keeping the ball in, less home runs than league average by a pretty wide margin, according to the park factors for last year. So a lot of reasons, I think. I'm with you. I never mind taking the cheap pitcher. I think projection wise, these guys never really meaningfully bubble up to me, but I do think just taking a guy who can avoid damage, give you 5 innings of competent work. That's been some of the better lineups I've had MLB wise, just taking the Brad Kellers of the world and hoping that either A, they somehow luck box a bunch of strikeouts, or B, they just have a decent enough game and somehow kill a highly owned stack. And it does seem like Texas is going to be pretty decently owned.
Yeah, I think Texas was getting, they're very cheap, which is why they're getting a lot of ownership. A lot of people are just building them in next to the Dodgers, the Padres, and teams like that and just rolling with it. Specifically, the optimizers are doing that quite a bit. But just to put a button on the Texas conversation real quick, looking at last year's numbers, small sample size alert, but you're talking about a lineup that has their leadoff man had a 0.90 ISO last season in 228 plate appearances. David Dahl only 99 plate appearances, pretty good hitter in general, and was a high pedigree prospect. So we'll forgive him a little bit, but 0.65 ISO last season. Joey Gallo 197 ISO, which is low for him. And then you get to Nick Solak cleaning up 0.77 ISO last season. Nate Lowe, actually pretty good, 209. And then sub 1 ISOs for everybody else going down the lineup. Brock Holt, Eli White, These are no-name players. So I think that Texas is getting very overrated by the field today in terms of their offense, and I think Keller's going to be sneaky.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the David Dahl just got into my lamps because he's 2,500, and I think that works. But you know,
good price for Dahl. Yeah.
I guess I'm just hoping he gets a couple walks today and does enough, and everything else in the Dodgers stack pays off. But yeah, definitely David Dahl, another value play, is going to be pretty highly owned. And I guess is sort of a pivot to Tommy Pham, but honestly, relative to the actual opportunity here, I do think that Tommy Pham going against Bumgarner is going to be a higher upside value play than David Dahl, but that's what I'm playing now, I guess.
And just Texas, just the last point on them as far as the strikeouts go. We talked about Keller's 16.3% strikeout rate last year, 17.2% the year before. Not a big strikeout pitcher, but from Steamer's projections for this season, average strikeout rate for the starting nine for the Rangers, 25%. So that is it's a killer strikeout spot for a guy who doesn't strike out a bunch of people. He might pick up a few in addition to expectation and be even better for the salary.
So here's one team that jumped out to me, and not in terms of their implied total, not in terms of the matchup even, because they're going against a pretty tough pitcher. I think you mentioned that you liked a little bit on the earlier show with Alex and Greg, but Cincinnati, it jumped out to me. The park factors for Cincinnati last year were unbelievable, and it's sort of small sample size because that season was short. And but you know, the park has always been a good home run park, and it was better than Coors last year in terms of hitting home runs, which I don't know how viable that is, how much that'll hold up over the course of an entire year. But this is a pretty power happy Cincinnati lineup going against a guy in Flaherty who, you know, is very good, I think, but maybe some distractions in the offseason with the fans turning on him because he didn't want to take whatever the Cardinals offered. God forbid for Cardinals fans. There's something else. But still, Cincinnati in the spot, you do have a lot of guys who have power who are going to be completely unowned. Not a great implied total, but Terry, would you get any Cincinnati here? Because you know, it is a nice park and a matchup that I don't know. It's not great on paper, but it just jumps out to me. They have so many power guys, and it's kind of jarring to see from Cincinnati.
Yeah, I like the Cincinnati lineup, actually. I think they're an underrated lineup coming into this season. You get a ton of power out of the top top five hitters between, you know, Jesse Winker, underrated, high power and very good on base skills, leading off 388 on base last season with a 289 ISO, 12 home runs and only 183 plate appearances for a leadoff man. That's killer. We know Nick Castellanos, kind of a known commodity. Joey Votto, a very known commodity. Eugenio Suarez with shortstop eligibility is killer for 4,000. 15 home runs, only a 202 average last season, but it was a 202, 312, 470. But he had a 268 ISO and still created, even with that bad triple slash, still created runs 4% better than average. And he is a better hitter than that. Year before last, 662 plate appearances, 49 home runs. Followed in the lineup by lefty Mike Moustakas, just in a killer spot. We know his power upside. And then don't sleep on Nick Senzel, former top end prospect. Came into the league, struggled a little bit, but now getting a full-blown opportunity, and I think can shine. Had a pretty decent spring to win the job, so don't sleep on him either. So basically be like a top 6 stack for me. I don't really need to go to the Jonathan Indias and Tucker Barnharts of the world.
Do you find any interest at all in St. Louis? I guess while we're just talking about this, going against Castillo, another guy who's a quality pitcher. I mean, these are two quality pitchers in the game, but playing in a park that allows a lot of power, I think, is one time where I'm willing to sort of, you know, avoid the fact or ignore the fact that the pitchers are really quality, or at least in some small amount of lineups. But you do have Nolan Arenado joining the Cardinals on their end, and I guess at least for one series, potentially masking the fact that I think Coors was really helping him out. And I'm reluctant to speak ill of Nolan Arenado, given the fact that to me is the favorite comparison. I know people love giving lookalikes to us on the YouTube channel. Terry's heard that he's Josh's dad more times than anybody can count, but being compared to Nolan Arenado, I think one of the highlights of my life and one that I'll hold near and dear to my heart. But that said, he was crap last year. He was really, and I think too, going into playing in St. Louis is not going to be great. Not a hitter's delight there, but this is a series where maybe he could get something going in a park that's a little more positive, like he was experiencing in Coors. Are you getting any Arenado? Do you find any interest in the Cardinals, who are on this slate completely overlooked? They are not playing anybody in the field, at least not expected to play anybody at all besides, I guess, some Tommy Edman as a cheap leadoff guy.
Yeah, and I think that's probably driven by the salaries being over 5,000, significantly over 5,000 on Arenado. But on Goldschmidt and Arenado, those two prices, I think, are keeping the rest of that St. Louis lineup off the board. And really, for me, it's like a 1 through 5 lineup. I would get to some Edman, I would get to some DeYoung and some O'Neill with those guys. But I don't really want any part of Yadi Molina, Dylan Carlson, Justin Williams from the bottom of the lineup, even though they're cheap. they just don't do a lot for me. So I would focus in on the top. I wasn't getting to it a ton organically in crunches, but if I was hand building out a bunch of lineups or sitting here with more time, I would probably look at them just to get a little bit of leverage against what's probably going to be one of the middle-owned type of pitchers, ace-type pitcher. I really like Luis Castillo, and I think he could carve up this lineup in a lot of situations. There are some strikeouts here for him, but yeah, I think they'd be in play as should be owned a little bit more than the field. Might be a little bit sneaky. Stick to the top end of the lineup, the known commodities.
Also, we are locking, or the slate locks 10 minutes after the hour, but I believe we're done. Chris, we're done at 5 minutes, right? Yeah, we're done. Okay, yeah. So we're done on the spot here because the NHL show is coming up after us. So, but make sure that you are getting your lineups in. You still have 15 minutes, but we are jumping off a little bit earlier than usual because NHL's got to give you guys all the best information on the ice. Every sport, there's too many sports going on right now. But
speaking of hockey and doppelgangers for us, yours is actually Mika Zibanejad in his FanDuel picture.
Oh, okay. I don't know who that is or how to spell it to look it up, but I'll
That's the one I've always thought for you. I didn't realize the Arenado one, but now that you say that, yeah, that one's right there too.
I will say on the other side of the air, and I'm reluctant to even bring it back to the universe, but one guy would come into every chat for a while and just be like, Spags is like Enes Kanter. And I'm like, fuck, man, I don't want that. Like, give me more Arenado. Don't give me Enes Kanter. I don't need that.
Enes Kanter just gets you accidentally assassinated by the Turkish government. So that would be bad for that reason.
Dark joke, Terry. But I respect it. He's got some problems with his home government.
Few issues with a despot. Yeah.
Honestly, he's got enough money to pay me as a doppelganger, I guess. So I'll be wouldn't mind that. Dope Heathen asking if I'm going to be doing the Four Corners videos for MLB this season. Yes, they are in fact coming back next week. So keep your eyes peeled, not for the first couple days of the season because we're trying to figure out the schedule and all of our producers timing and all that. But looks like on Monday, we'll be back in that one. So Four Corners coming back, including the giveaways. And you can guess your double dong home run picks to win free weeks of Awesemo Plus in the comments on there. So excited to get that back and be able to give back a little more to you guys membership wise. Let's see. There was one question here. Somebody also said, Terry, that you need to pronounce all the Latino names to get your flair going. And I did appreciate I didn't know your mom was Cuban. I think that's a Terry fun fact that it slipped my memory.
Yeah. Half Cuban, half Irish. It's a good combo. Get a lot of, fire and, I don't know what in there, a lot of fire and a lot of ability to BS, I guess. This is, kind of what I get out of it, but, yeah, good combo.
Diverse kinds of alcohols too. That's
sure.
You got your rum, you got your whiskey, got everything you need. Let's see. Shout out to the chat too. Awesemo had a very funny Photoshop of our pal EMAC yesterday. EMAC 2024, really gaining some grassroots momentum. Probably grassroots, given that it's EMAC. Grassroots momentum. So shout out Awesemo for being a good guy and doing a fun little Photoshop. Any final, I guess, under-owned, low-owned plays? Anybody that you want to throw out at the people out there just as they're going to have 10 minutes to play with this, their lineups themselves without us, and anything that you want to give them before we jump off here and clear the way for the NHL guys?
Take a quick look at the home run board. I mentioned had a bunch of Boston guys. We don't get them anymore. Yankees game already started, but we can get into some of these. Liking the Cleveland side of things. I mentioned Franmil as my home run pick, but I'm getting decent marks on Eddie Rosario and Jose Ramirez in there as well. San Diego, obviously getting a few in that. Toronto, I was getting to, but that game already started. I'm just trying to scroll down this thing. Getting a lot of those games up top. Jock Peterson, a guy that I mentioned, good potential for a home run. 13.83 above average mark in my board here. Ronald Acuna, obviously from the Braves, super duper star that we didn't really talk about very much, but I mentioned how the Braves profile pretty well against right-handed pitching. Tough matchup against Aaron Nola, a very good right-handed pitcher, but I think the Braves could be a little bit sneaky there, and Acuna's explosively at the top of the home run board here for that team. Getting into some Colorado, some Jorge Soler has a decent little above average home run mark. So those are some of the guys from the home run board. A couple sneaky Baltimore guys that we don't get to play in here too.
Was Acuna higher than Freeman? I would put Freeman. I think Freeman busts up Nola's day. Like, I don't know if Nola's still going to have like a bad day by any stretch, but I'd have some concern that Freeman takes some yard.
I think Acuna did end up higher than Freeman. It does take potential plate appearances into account, so he gets a little bit of a bump from that just by virtue of being 2 spots ahead in the lineup. But it's he's about 2 points ahead in my little metric here.
All right,
still a good mark for Freeman.
Okay. Yeah, come back later today, guys, because we have one more live before lock for MLB coming up 6 p.m. Eastern time, or 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. West Coast time, and that'll be Terry and Gundacker making his debut on live before lock for MLB. Terry, any final plugs before we get out of the way?
Somewhere in between the end of this and the start of that, I'm going to be writing an NBA column if you guys are playing basketball today too. So jump in there and give that a check and watch all the different shows. We've got a ton of content coming your way, guys. Hit me up in Slack, send me an email, however you want to get in touch. Always happy to answer questions and talk shop about this stuff.
Yeah, make sure to use that promo code starting9 at awesemo.com/join. 9 days for $9. Also, shout out Jock Market for being a sponsor on the show. Make sure you're checking out their MLB product and use that promo code of Awesemo50 for a $50 deposit match on your first deposit on there. And then I'll be back in a couple hours for the tip-off. So see you guys then. Have a good first day of MLB, and bye. Gundacker.
Yeah, we need something that's like LA
Rock.